Welcome one, welcome all to the post-show panel once again. We're doing this one more time because I want to make the show a thing. So we're going to make the show a thing in the wake of the ESL Pro League. Season 16 wrapped up last night and we're one day away from the RMR beginning. So we're running to a very tight schedule today to try and get all the content out in preparation for that tournament. A lot of teams that were featured in Pro League will be featured there as well. So a lot to discuss today. I'm the Eternal J. I'm the host. I'm the guy. This is my channel. This is my content. This is my shit. And these are my guests right here. We've got a bunch of good people who are joining us. I'm going to call us the B-Stream Bitches plus Retro in this particular case. Going clockwise. No, we'll see why. You'll see why. You'll see this. You'll see why. Scriv, welcome. Great to have you back. Of course. How you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm good. I've had a nice little weekend away trying to catch all the Pro League while I was on my travels and going out. And, you know, I was at a gig and then my guy stopped playing a song. I checked HLTV and then he started playing a song again and I'd, you know, watch and listen. So it was a nice little multitask. But yeah, I'm very well.
Awesome. Good to hear. Of course, Scriv, very good friend of mine for a very long time. So always great to have a chat and have make some content with you. So great to see that you accepted. Great to see that you're back here and being on that content grind yourself. I'm sure that you've got plenty more to say with plenty more people as the days roll on. I've also got Trav, of course, joining me from the pick and post shows as well as the only guy to agree to all three of them, even though the third one didn't actually happen. And actually this season it was your debut for casting the ESL Pro League. How was that, mate?
Yes. I gotta say I was quite proud of that one. You know, having started literally in advanced, right, in open IP advanced games, and you know, the rise of going from doing every single league basically in the ESL families. It was pretty crazy, and I got a chance to do that one with Scriv. Very happy to do that game. Eternal Fire versus Movistar Riders. It was the expected result. Eternal Fire won it 2-0. I think it was a bit too quick. Unfortunately, it would have been nice if it was a bit of a longer game for my Pro League debut, but I hope it won't be the last one. So,
listen, mate, when I did my first IEM events, all the matches were really shit. We were doing North America games during the downfall of North America during the pandemic, so don't worry, you got infinitely better shit than I did on my first ESL outing. Okay. Three of us have casted B and C streams for ESL Pro League. Retro, how many have you done?
Be nice. Be nice.
Yeah. Listen, man, listen. Like, there's only a finite amount of slots, you know. Like, people deserve it. That's okay, man. That's okay, you know. We're waiting for my time. The fingers are crossed.
Your time might not be that far away, so I'll just drop that little seed in there for everyone to speculate over on at home. But enough speculation. Let's talk about what happened over the last 5 weeks of the ESL Pro League by showing you, of course, exactly what happened over the course of the 5 weeks of ESL Pro League. 24 teams entered, as you would expect. Many partners, of course, teams coming in from the world rankings and conference stages. You can see them on screen as to who exactly participated, and to run you through the results, this is what we got. Vitality, G2, Mouse and Cloud9 dominated their respective groups, with Fnatic, Na'Vi, Faze, Outsiders, Heroic Complexity, Furia and Liquid pulling in the rear and also taking those lower spots in the playoffs. The playoff bracket looked as such, with Faze, Liquid, Na'Vi and Outsiders making their way in from the round of 12 games. The quarterfinals saw Cloud9, Liquid, Vitality and G2 come out in the semi-finals, and then Liquid, Vitality made their way into the grand finals, which was a bonanza last night at the full 5-map series, giving Vitality their first trophy as an international team. So, overall thoughts about the tournament, gentlemen? I mean, look, it was one that garnered a little bit of criticism, but also quite a lot of excitement in general across the team storylines playing out. I know that this wasn't the most fantastic Pro League in terms of its setting and environment, and I guess that sort of does call into question certain things about Pro League as a whole. Like, what do you make of this season so far?
I mean, I thought usually Pro League is very open-ended. I thought this is probably one of the most open-ended seasons that we've had, which, you know, is now going to become a running theme, isn't it, over the next couple of weeks and probably heading into the major. But the you know, letdown of certain teams, the overperformance of other teams, it's a lot stronger than it usually is. Sometimes there's that one team, like a Sinners or you know, a Movistar Riders even, right, have done it in the past, where they do really well in their group and everyone's like, wow, and then they get into playoffs and they just kind of get wrecked, and it's like, all right, fair enough, back to, you know, what we expected, back to normalcy. But yeah, there were a good number of upsets, I think, throughout for me in this tournament, which, you know, some fun results. I still feel like Pro League has, as you're kind of saying, a few of those maybe formatting issues. Some of the games can feel a bit weird, especially on that final day of the group where it's like, what's really going on here? What are we playing for? But they're always sort of working around that. And then, yeah, I don't know. One of the big things I think that also stood out is that it feels like it's just sort of a league to be there for the partners at the moment. Like, it's cool for the teams. We see where they're at, who's going to beat who, etc. But it's not really an event from like our perspective, from spectators' perspective. There's no sort of way in where I want to go to Malta to a bit of a 10K arena or whatever. It was just sort of like a hotel ballroom, so it felt a little bit weird from the viewers' point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. To be fair, I think what I think I do like, which some people might not like, is the fact that you do get those sort of matches at the end of the group where it's completely up in the air and you don't know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, some people hate not knowing, but I like the fact there's an unknown and it takes a little bit of working out to figure it out, because you can have a situation, of course, in that group that I had the fortune of doing where nearly every single team but Movistar Riders could have made it through. So I think that's what makes it exciting, even though it could be a little bit complicated. But yeah, I do agree with the location and stuff. I think it's a shame that it's going to be in Malta. I think it is for the next 2 years, right? So it's probably be quite difficult for anyone, quite challenging for anyone to go over and watch that as a spectator. I mean, I looked at some of the old pro leagues that are in like Denmark, for example, and the great crowds that were there. That just sort of brings back nice memories, and you sort of get a bit of nostalgia. And I wish I could go back to that, but just that logistically, to get all the teams over, unfortunately, for the spectators' POV, kind of makes sense the way it is at the moment.
I mean, I'm kind of on the idea that they should have done the group stages in Malta, then transported it out to somewhere else. Personally, like I feel like that would have made a bit more sense to give maybe like a week break potentially, and then go into like the big playoff bracket and run that from within an arena. Or like, I'm thinking back to other events we used to have in Malta. There was that event that. What was it Eden? The TO that was previously known as Quickfire. They ran that Champions Cup thing, which looked like it had a decent set. I know the turnout for that event wasn't all that amazing, but I was thinking that if they tried to shoot something on the scale of that, then maybe it could have worked a bit better for ESL in the finals.
I think for me as well, right, it's like when you look at the RMRs and the major, I know it's very different because it's the biggest event of the year. Pro League's like the second biggest event of the year, right? I think like we have some pretty big standout events. Maybe your Colognes and Catos are up there, but the name takes direction of where the event is. But for Pro League, right, we've offered 835k as a prize pool. You look at the RMRs and teams are going to Sweden, teams are going to Malta, and I know it's all studio based, and so it's a little bit easier. But as Trav said, like, why couldn't we split it in half, or why couldn't we have like all of the games being played in Malta, and then for the top 12 or whatever, right, you just go and play them at a big venue. And I think back to ESL Pro League, as Trevor was saying, like, I think the one that Cloud9 won, right? I think they won one back in the day, and it was like Sao Paulo, and it was like, there was like 20,000 people watching. The crowd was like nuts, and like, if you can get that much of a turnout for an old Pro League, like, imagine what it's like now, especially because realistically, all we've got going is your Colognes, your Catos, your majors, and Europe as a whole is missing out on the major because it's in Brazil this year. Like, you've just opened up such a market that if you were to even like redo it in Cologne, or like, you were to have the Pro League finals held in Cologne, like, I think, you'd be blasting. And I think a lot of us here maybe getting tickets, a lot of people at home getting tickets. Like, it would be super accessible. The plane ticket prices won't be that bad because obviously everyone's back at school now as well, so you won't run into like that issue. It's just, I don't know. It's a bit disappointing, really, that the crowd is a bit minimal. What I'd also like to point out, right? I know it's not exactly ESL's fault, but the blast points, you get 2,800 for coming first, but also for coming first, you just get invited to the Blast Global Final spot anyway. So the thing that you're competing for, you just get an invite to. So that's one other thing that I thought was quite comedic, is that you get a shed load of points for coming first, but you also get an invite to the Blast Global Finals. So I don't know what's going on there with Blast. What's the point?
Yeah, it feels like maybe they're still working that side of things out, aren't they? Between the two of them, between the two operators that want to exist in the same space. There's still a little bit more editing, let's say, to do on that front.
Yeah. On the point about the venue stuff, like I don't even think that it's necessary to have like an arena. Like I remember back to early pro leagues, like in season 3, we held it in London at this venue called Indigo, and it was like a 2,000 person venue, and it was fucking wild. Like if anyone has a chance to go back and watch that final, just to show you how like how much a small crowd could still have impact if put in the right environment. I just don't think the environment was right for that Malta final, but. Ultimately, like, you know, it is a decision that ESL made. I think there could be improvements had they want to just invest the money. Obviously, they're not short of that right now. I think that everyone's struggling also to come out of what we used to do in the pandemic to try and transition all those tournaments, and we had some good runs. Obviously, the Stockholm Major is a perfect example of how bad things can get and how unused to coming out of the online environment that we really were. So I don't know if ESL are suffering with that too much. I like to give them the benefit of the doubt because obviously working with them, I know that they're good people. But obviously, I think that if they're internally, they're probably looking at this this whole pro league, and I'm hoping that they hope to try and like improve it for future seasons. And again, there are many suggestions and many alternatives that could be brought out, but time will tell how far it will go in that sort of sense. So, pro league rating out of 5 stars, I'll give it I'll give it a solid 3. How about you, Griff?
Yeah, I'm on that fence as well. I'd say maybe like a 3.2 if we're doing proper 3.2. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
But yeah, around the same sort of level, to be honest. Like it was good. Yeah, some of the game, we definitely had a banger final out of it. To be fair, that really did elevate it for me.
Yeah, if we're going to go for the decimal points, I'll give it like a 3.5, 3.6 because I know obviously we're going to get onto the fact what we think about FaZe and Navi both not making it, but I think the semi-finals, not including them, gave it a really nice, fresh feeling. Considering if you're just looking at the HLTV rankings recently and just seeing the big gap, like the chasm between FaZe and Navi and the rest of the teams in the world, it was really nice to see a semi-final lineup without any of them at all. I really enjoyed that, and I think the final living up to the billing for a BO5 is quite rare as well. So I'm almost willing to go up to a 4 in terms of the teams and the matches. To be honest,
I was going to say a 4 actually, because I think that although it may not just be Pro League itself, but I think we've actually set ourselves up really nicely for the RMRs, being that clearly FaZe and Navi can be beaten. And so what does that mean for them? Especially when you've got to think, like, obviously we're not going to talk too much about the RMRs today, but they're all BO1s there. And if you can get clapped at a BO3 like they did, well, maybe not clapped so much, but if you can lose at a BO3 like Navi did to G2 and Cloud9 obviously did later down the line to Liquid, sure, the Liquid Cloud9 game was close, and the G2 Navi game was. I mean, the first map was close. The last 2 maps, G2 kind of ran away with it. I mean, if those teams can beat them in BO3s, what's not to say we have like another BO3 glory run like Bad News Eagles, for example, and then all of a sudden the cat's out of the hat, like, everything's going insane. So for me, I'd actually give it a 4. I think the only thing that let down was the venue itself and the crowd, because I think we kind of wanted a bit more out of it. But actually, the level of Counter-Strike was sick, and obviously, as pointed out, it's nice to see that Navi and FaZe Clan can both be beaten.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll get to talking about both those teams as the show rolls on. For now, let's start talking about results overall with starting with the group stage, and we'll sort of work our way up. That's the way I like to do things. We'll start small and then get towards those playoffs. So don't worry, we'll get to the whole Vitality and Liquid thing a little bit later on. But again, just to go back to those group stage standings, obviously, a bunch of teams that were eliminated that maybe you might not have expected to have been over the course of this one. So I guess for the most part, we have got the expected eliminatees in their respective positions. But Group A always stood out to me to start things off, because I remember watching as NIP got eliminated, and that obviously spurred in a massive change for that organization, because in the wake of that Group A result, they made roster changes. So I kind of wanted to start there as a good primer, because even though they did end up at the bottom of like the middle 3, they were still like within prime position to potentially take control of some sort of top 3 spot. So for the Ninjas, was this as bad of a loss as maybe they might have expected it to be?
I don't think so, right? Because first of all, for me, and we never really are. Was that Alexi B move already lined up, already gonna happen before they came into the event? Not sure, right? Or was it like, we're ready? The deal is kind of there. We just need a reason to put it forwards. We've checked out of group stages. Right, there's our reason. So we don't quite know like the history behind it necessarily. But also, this group really weird, Really weird the way that it ended up going. You know, it was a round difference decision, which feels like a bit of a whack way to qualify. Obviously, it's got to be there for points like this, but had they, you know, I think if they beat Na'Vi 2-0, they go through, right? I think.
Yes, I believe that was the
But because it
tiebreaker
was
at the
only-
time.
Yeah, because it was only 2-1, they didn't go through, right? But there are obviously 3 teams that are in contention, which is very cool, but the way that it played out is a lot flatter than you would expect. But at the same time, they only really beat Na'Vi, where it was probably, you know, in that series. Let me just double check here. Okay, so Na'Vi won the second map. I was going to say maybe they won the first or whatever, but they won the second map. So there was certainly a little bit of tension rolling through there. You know, are they going to make it? Are they going to get it cleanly and all that sort of stuff? But the other team that they beat was Endpoint, and you know, we love Endpoint, and they beat Na'Vi, very cool. But at the same time, you know, it is probably the team that you expect to struggle in this group. But saying that, I think NIP for me kind of continue to disappoint. Probably should have picked up the game against Spirit or Fnatic, and then they're in at that point, you know, if they win those games. So I feel like NIP is probably the bigger disappointment in here. Obviously, the one that really does stand out and continue to stand out as the tournament went on was the fact that Na'Vi looked very, very flat. You feel like it should have been Vitality the only team to give them any sort of run for their money, whereas like everyone did at one point, you know. So, but those are kind of the two. I think that this NIP roster, you know, Alexi B is going to have to change a lot, and hopefully it'll be a big turnaround for them, because all that, you know, momentum they had behind them coming into the Stockholm major and then a little bit into the Antwerp major, all that's just gone now, and they've really struggled to return to that form as well over the past sort of 6 to 8 months.
It's a weird one, isn't it? Because I think that while a lot of people are rightly questioning this NIP move and pick up Alexi, I mean, it's completely out of left field, right? They want Rez to start AWPing, which is a weird thing. I mean, even in the announcement, I think I read that they said that what they've seen from Rez is equal to Simple and Zywu in terms of ability, and it's like, you don't say that on an announcement. Like, come on, guys, like what are you saying? I believe Rez to be very good at rifling and AWPing, but that's just something that puts too much pressure on your main man. But I think I'm one of the few people that kind of understands this, because they're sort of a nowhere team that will either get close to making a big upset or just bombing out. So just taking a risk like this, sure, it's probably the scariest time to take a risk, like before the RMR. They could easily bomb out. We've got no idea how they're going to work. At the RMR, as you say, Alexi's going to have a lot of sort of probably been putting in the work daily to try and sort out that roster. But yeah, of course, there's question marks about whether Hampus, now he's not IGLing and putting himself in the best roles, which I believe he was before, as well, is another factor. How he performs when he's not in that situation. But yeah, it's a tough one. I understand it, because I feel like that organization needed to take a risk, full stop. But I'm worried about how it's going to go for them, and I'm not entirely confident, put it that way.
Yeah, I kind of had similar sort of vibes about that when it came to the move for Alexi B coming in, because even though they obviously he's well celebrated in terms of what he did over on that end side, I have to sort of question whether or not like he has the capacity to replicate that in another form, in another team later on, because his post projects after Ents haven't always been all that solid. You think about what OG were able to do, and it's like it was sort of up and down over the course of that one. Obviously G2 is the perfect example of that, where they were spending all this money, buying big, getting all these stars, and then adding Alexi B, and still all the pieces didn't come together, minus that one Katowice second place. So it's like I'm of a similar mind to Trav here. It is a bit of a risk there for NIP, one that they had to make, but it's like, is it the right call is the big question that we'll be asking over the course of the next 3 months or so.
I was going to mention Fnatic a little bit, if that's all right.
Sure,
I think for them, I want to give a massive prop to them, actually, for how they conducted themselves in the groups. Obviously, when you look at the playoff stage, they lost to Liquid, right? Which is a bit disappointing that you get knocked out in the round of 12. Liquid looked great that event, so it's kind of understandable that they do lose. But you put up a map against Liquid in the playoff stage, and in the group stage, obviously you go 3-2. In that, you beat NIP 16-4 twice. You take a map off Na'Vi in which it's 16-14. Obviously, you lose to Vitality, you beat Spirit 2-0, 16-11, 16-9, and you beat Endpoint 16-8, 16-10. And to think that this roster of Fnatic we thought wasn't even going to get to the level that they were at beforehand, right? Like we were so confused as to what this roster was going to be. Obviously, this year I think they've made 5 or 6 changes, right? In terms of players, we had Smooya in, Regali in, Brolan's jumped in. They bench Alex and Poison. They bring Pepzor back to the academy team after coming back to the main team. They buy out Fasha from Ecstatic. They buy out Nikodos and Roy from Copenhagen Flames. Obviously, Poison's out at the roster from earlier on. His contract finally expires. And for a team that's in so much turmoil, the fact that I think this is probably what their second maybe event together as a team, definitely hasn't been too ripe how the Fnatic side have been playing, right? They play in the Gamers X EU Champions. They go 3rd, 4th, lose to Sangal as well. It was super rough for them, but coming into Pro League, they had no expectation whatsoever. And to see how well they performed, they get through. Sure, again, it's a bit cheesy, as Skriv said, on round difference, a little bit, Oh, no, they didn't. They went 3-2, didn't they? So it wasn't even a round difference. They actually beat that whole bonanza of round difference. And so they weren't in the runnings of being removed from the event unless they lost that final BO3 of the day. And obviously, whatever else happened in that group, basically they couldn't lose to Endpoint, and that was the easiest draw of the lot. So for them, the fact that they went 2-2 heading into the easiest team of the lot, of course, Endpoint, big props to them. I'm happy to see where they are. And actually, it's very exciting to see this new Fnatic team.
Yeah, I think me and Dweg were saying it on the day when we did the concurrent days for Group A. It's like, even though Vitality are bound to get their 5-0, the real stars of the show in this group were Fnatic, because they walked in pretty much expectationless. Like, we didn't know what we were going to see from this team, because, as you mentioned, it was their first event outing. They played in a couple of online tournaments. When it came to LAN competition, it wasn't like we'd never seen them before. Like, this was the new look roster, a whole revamped core again. Like you mentioned, so many changes being made, but bringing in that core from Copenhagen Flames and adding others from that Danish and Dutch sort of scenes. Like, it was a complete rebuilding for Fnatic. So this was the litmus test above all else. So really, like, everything was on and off the table for them. The fact that they came second place, looked as good as they did, it actually makes me excited for Fnatic again now. Like, I think this might end up being another decent dark horse like they used to have back when they had Smooya in the roster, when they had those good placements at the early part of the year. Maybe minus the internal issues, perhaps. Whether or not that ends up being the case, of course, we'll see. But look, right, you can't take a look at this Fnatic side and think that they did a bad job in this one, because I think that they had a fantastic tournament, guys.
No, I'm completely on board with that. I actually really love this Fnatic team. I was obviously a little bit worried about Mezzy IGLing, but I think he's shown that he's capable of that, because obviously he was putting up great numbers when it was when he wasn't IGLing. So I was worried how that would impact the team. But anything that can reactivate Crims, I think, is a good thing. I don't think Crims, especially Crims and Brolan, for example, were at all inspired by having Smooya on the team. They obviously were just fed up with him pretty quickly. And when the vibes aren't good, the results won't be good. That tends to be how it is. So, I think Roy and Nikodos are doing a great job. Roy, of course, is very similar age to Fasha, so I was slightly worried that bringing in a second sort of mid-20s rifler might not work, but realistically, having seen Fasha play ever since his low and lion days, rest in peace, I had a feeling that he would grow into the role really nicely, and he has, and I'm honestly really happy to see that. And I do think I agree with Jay in the fact that this team is actually one of the cheeky ones that I'm putting through as a wild card 3-0 in the RMR, just out of the blue.
Wow.
Because I just feel like something could happen and results could go their way. And there's always one team that goes 3-0 that you're not expecting to go 3-0. So I'm picking them.
I kind of want to turn this into an RMR pre-show now that you've just said that there, Trav. Like, that's very intriguing. I don't know if, I mean, definitely one that you could expect to have good performances. I'm not sure whether I'm as confident in that side of things, because again, we have seen so little from these guys, but I just flashed the numbers up on screen. You can see that on an individual basis, they They all look fantastic. You were right about Mezzi's IGLing. I had some big skepticism about that because Mezzi is comparatively very inexperienced on this roster of players who have been at the majors. I don't think Mezzi has been at one, if memory serves me correctly. So we're talking about like just a team where the disparate parts really shouldn't have come together and made anything that you would expect to go as far as they did. And again, they managed to do that pretty nicely, and the future does look bright for them. In terms of like future expectations, I do feel like if they can continue hitting playoffs and continue sort of making those good runs in the early stages and strong groups and what have you, then they're going to be primed for success. And in the RMR, it's going to be wild matches because they're all best of ones for the most part. So it does get a bit unpredictable in that sort of sense. But I wouldn't pick them as a 3-0 team, but definitely one of the teams I expect to have a decent crack at making it through.
Yeah, I feel like they're actually a relatively good BO1 team as well, because they're sort of a little bit merchanty on a few maps, you know? So I think that they could, you know, get off to a strong start at the very least in the group and then be within reach of a 3-0. So I can definitely get on board with what Trav said. I definitely do agree that, as we've said, sprinkled in with a few best of ones, there's always a team that sort of overperforms and surprises and all that good stuff, right? So, and yeah, Fnatic, it feels like there'd be a good argument for that because they're a decent team. They've proved themselves to be decent at Pro League, but they also still have that sort of, you know, no pressure kind of scope to perhaps overperform. So I'm excited to see if this performance will push them forwards.
Awesome. We'll save the Vitality and Na'Vi talk for later on in the show, obviously, because they did get deeper in the bracket. Anything particular to say about Spirit or Endpoint, boys?
Na'Vi, mate, what a mess they had against Endpoint. And we'll leave it at that.
We'll save that for later. Don't worry about that one. All right, well, let's move on to Group B. Of course, as I mentioned before, G2 were the dominant force in this particular one. Faze and Outsiders came in second and third. Big MIBR and FTW, of course, were the three losers. For the most part, I can't be too fussed with how this one played out because I do think we found the right teams in the right places. I do think there was a bit of a scuffle between, obviously, Big and the Outsiders, but there were no tiebreakers there, so you can't debate too much about how well that happened. Or how much you had in that sort of sense. I'm a bit upset because I do hope that Big can just beat this Outsiders team because I'm not a fan of their play style from a viewer's perspective. But ultimately, like, you know, Big are the ultimate coin toss team. Like I was saying on the Not Out Here podcast was a few weeks ago now, that literally like you could flip a coin and that would be a better analysis than any stats or statistics that I can pull out or any sort of eye test that I can do, because Big are the kind of team that would beat FaZe in the RMR, then go online and lose to fucking Masonic. So I'm not really like I can't bank on the idea that they would make it to top 3 all that easily. I didn't do so in this one. I would have liked to have seen it just because I prefer Big over the Outsiders. But we got the right teams in the right places for me.
I'll start the topic on Big a little bit more. I think back to the Rubek Cup that happened, I think, what was it, June time? And they beat the lot, right? They came first in the Rubek Cup. They had FaZe, OG, and Entropic in their group. They went 2-0, in which they beat Entropic 2-1 and FaZe 2-1. They obviously had the rematch with FaZe in the grand final and beat them again. Not to mention they beat Cloud9 2-0 earlier in the bracket. And it was Eternal Fire that took more rounds off them than Cloud9 did. And so for me, the fact that in June we're kind of hyping up Big as like, okay, how on earth have they just won this Rubek Cup? You look maybe at the other events they've been playing as well. They played 2 other events between that Rubek Cup and ESL Pro League. One, of course, was Cologne, where they bombed out in 17th to 20th, a huge disappointment there. And they came 10 to 12th in the Blast Fall groups. And so you kind of wonder how a team can go from such tenure and composure in the Rubek Cup to beat FaZe twice in BO3s, and then you just suck for the rest of the year from then until now. It's kind of like, okay, sure, it was quite close, and as you said, I think on a different day, maybe Big do get that place over Outsiders, and from a viewer's perspective, it would have been nice to see this Big roster partake in the playoff stage again. But how on earth do we go from winning Rubek Cups to coming quite literally
Online CS.
bottom of the barrel?
How.
In Cologne? I mean, you are right. It's online CS. I do get that. But if you look at the history that they have, they also lost to Outsiders in the Cologne play-ins. So I don't know if it's the curse of the CIS region or it is, as Trav said, just online CS. Either way, they win Rubek Cup, they play at LAN a little bit, and get a little bit more, at home maybe with the ping, and then it just all goes horrifically again for Big, and it's very disappointing because we always talk about now the RMR's coming up. Like, where do you even put Big? Like, I've thought about this, and I still don't have a formulated answer and a definite one on where the hell Big are going to be, because if they're online, they're absolutely wrecking people, but it's not online and they're sucking again, and it's kind of like, what do where do you set the bar for Big?
It's weird, isn't it?
Just to insert, I do love how Retro was trying his best to be irate without saying a single swear word. It was very cute.
Yeah, I didn't want to flame too hard because, like,
mate,
I think you got to give him the floor a little bit.
Listen, like, whenever we talk about me and Dwight, whenever we talk about like casting Big, like, I always know that he's got a bit of a hate boner for them for the exact reason that you've just mentioned right there. Because
man,
it is such a frustrating team to watch because you expect them to have some sort of basis because they've proven that they can, and then they just shit the bed every single time. So I never ever bank on Big to do anything impressive ever for the reasons that you've basically explained. But I think that comes to the question: why do we see such inconsistency from this Big squad, Trav?
I don't know. I'll be honest, I'm at a bit of a loss, and I wouldn't be surprised if the big team are also at a bit of a loss about it. I mean, they've tried so many different players, of course. I think they're playing the RMR without Faven as well, aren't they? They're playing...
yeah.
But they are playing... Is his name Sin, from memory? Is that the guy?
Yeah, that's the guy.
What I've heard from when he was playing in Big Academy at Philadelphia, everyone was hugely impressed with him. So I think it could even be a good thing for Big to try him out instead of Faven. But still, I mean, even looking aside from that, they're a team that I always think will prove to. I class Big. This is a weird one. Maybe you'll agree with this or not. But I class Big in like this era to be a bit like the annoying flip side of like 2016, because they'll always make the major. I feel like they'll always qualify. They'll make these big events. They'll make Pro League, and they'll always beat one team you don't expect them to beat. But then they'll just do nothing for the rest of the event. So I don't know. I'm confident they're going to make the major through the RMR, but as I say, I just think that once they're actually there, even now they've got Gobby, which obviously everyone said bringing him back in the coach slot is probably the best thing they could ever do. I just feel like they're going to be one of those teams that goes like 2-3 or something, and just miss out. It's a tough one. But on the flip side, of course, that is genuinely no pun intended. With outsiders, they actually performed a lot better than I thought they were going to, which interests me as well. Because I think Flame and Norbert, I was a fan of those two pickups because having seen them play on K23 so much, I knew that the quality they had. I just didn't know how they'd like to play under James' leadership, who famously creates the most boring Counter-Strike of all time. So, I mean, it even made the talent scream at how boring it was in that Vitality Dust 2 game. It was so awful. But, I think they are better than I thought, which is surprising me.
Yeah, okay. So I feel like there's maybe a little bit of like a culture in the German CS of, like putting too much pressure on yourself or something along those lines. I feel like they've had not necessarily like choking, but just really not the best headspace kind of thing to be in going into these bigger games, right? Because I think that's the thing. It's like they're at home. It's a bit more of a fun vibe, and whatnot, and they perform a lot better. They play against the team that you expect them to beat. They look really good, and they're like, all right, let's see what they can do. And then when the challenge comes along, they just look a bit too almost like rigid and, just, I don't know, it just seems to not fall apart, but they make life a lot harder for themselves than it needs to be. And I think that maybe that is just, part of, we've heard some of the Sprout players in the past talk about it, which is obviously where some of these guys have come from, actually. So I think that maybe they need like a big overhaul, or they need someone to sort of crack that glass, as it were, and everyone figures that out. Maybe a sports psychologist. I'm sure that they've got one in there somewhere. Maybe they need to get a few or something, but it does just seem like they just hit a wall. They always seem to hit a wall, and similar to NIP in a sense. I think NIP are a bit more in shape, but this team should be able to do a lot more than they, we got Faven on the pickup. Maybe Keto's a bit of a surprise coming back into the team, but that's okay. He's already played with us before, we got a young player, we got some experienced players, etc., etc. And it feels like the pieces are there, and then some games it's like, here we go, it's fitting in. This is a tournament where they'll do well, and then they just off the cliff the next game, you know. So
Yeah.
it's wild.
I do have to question certain players' performances, and I hate to be that guy, but I'm just going to bring up the stats very quickly for the roster overall, because I've not been a fan of Keto since he's come into this team. I'm just not a fan of him in this lineup. Like, the numbers speak for themselves, obviously. The only player to go red on the big side in this particular tournament. But even going back to tournaments like, I remember there was a specific anecdote I like to tell about Pinnacle Cup and that championship event in Lund. They had to sub out Crimbo for Keto because of a health issue, which I guess kind of a bit of commonality when you consider the Farthings out for the RMR the same. So, like, I don't know if that's like a common problem within Big itself, but obviously when Keto came in, Big did not do well at all during that particular tournament. And now that he's a permanent member of the roster, I just feel like he's being a bit of dead weight. Like, he did well in the academy side, but as soon as he's come up to tier 1, he's just not performed at all. So there's a part of me hoping that when they go to the RMR, Sin will do well and be able to put up some decency in his own performance and do something right there to sort of like shift his way into the main roster. Because if he's as hyped as they say he is, then maybe he could be one of the answers to give Big a bit more consistency, if nothing else.
I think as well, you got to look at the longest standing players or your highest rated players, Tabson and Searson. Searson's been in the team for 2 years and 8 months. Tabson has been a standing player on that roster for 2,093 days. I think it's one of the biggest stints we've had for one person on one team at any given time, which is fair play to him. Like, he stuck around for a little while. I think an issue for me, and something that we've kind of seen them explore, and if I'm honest, it kind of worked out for them, is when they stuck to the German core but brought in more European talent. Maybe is this something Big want to look at? I know their academy team is German, so it definitely doesn't look to see that way when we're bringing up talent if they're all German speaking and you don't really like have that opportunity. But I think back to when Smuya was in that team. Obviously, he was in it for 278 days. That's when they qualified, I think, for their only major, right? And they peaked at number 6. He then played with them just before the start of 2020, and they peaked 21, and Smuya was in there for 142 days. I look at when Xantares was in that roster, and they were number 1 in the world at one point, and I don't think Xantares speaks a blip of German, or if he does, it's very minimal, and so they were probably speaking English, and that was only when Xantares was in that team, and Smuya had a bit of an overlap in time there. But other than that, right, you look at that core, and that's when they did so well, is when they stuck to their German roots, but we actually explored options outside of Germany. Is that something they're going to do in the future? Maybe not so much. They kind of like half dabbled in it with Gade, right? Who obviously does speak German, but he's Danish, and they got 10th. And so even though individually he didn't have the best stats, is this now another option that maybe the Big Clown want to look at? Me personally, I completely agree with you. I look at the stats. I think Keto's got to go. I don't think he's actually, he's only been in there a month, admittedly, but he's not really done much. I think you look back to the last stint he had as well. Obviously, he peaked at number 1, but even then, in the time that he spent there, he was sub 1.0 HLTV. And I'm not sure if that's because, maybe he's taken a more relaxed approach and he's playing the lesser impact roles. For me, though, you've given him a second try, especially now at the RMRs. If you don't make it, you don't make the major. It's a big blow to Big, and there's got to be changes made. And I'd like to see more of a European spin taken on this team.
I think the issue you have, obviously, is the fact that Big are Berlin International Gaming, so you kind of tied yourself down to the nationality in that sort of sense. It is kind of a thing like the branding. I do know that I believe that Big do have some other teams that are of different nationalities and other esports, but whether or not they want to commit to that in CSGO is, of course, a completely different story. So I'm not certain personally. I mean, I do concur with the idea that maybe an extra star player that might fill an international role and still keep the main like 4 or 3 players as a German core might be the way to go about that one. But that's down to the organization itself. And look, at the end of the day, even though Big aren't the best tier 1 team, I don't think they should be. They aren't the biggest organization that we have in Counter-Strike. So, for them, any win's a win, but in this case, it just wasn't a big win for them. So, yeah, that secures them for Group B. We'll give G2 and Faze a bit of a miss until the playoffs. Anything to say about outsiders, MIBR, FTW, guys?
Well, what I will say about FTW is I don't feel like they've obviously a lot of the tier 1 talent won't have seen them play because they probably wouldn't have taken much notice of conference, I would say.
No.
But I will say that that was inevitable that they would finish last purely because of the switch between their SOAR and FTW, right? Because Stododo went back to Today went to FTW and they swapped Story over. It's one of the players.
Yeah, and U-Jerks as well.
U-Jerks, that's the one. That was always going to happen, unfortunately, because if you're a Portuguese player and SOAR comes calling, you're going to say yes to whatever happens, unfortunately. So I think FTW were doomed from the beginning, even if they they had their full roster, maybe they would have done a bit better. But still, I think it was just unfortunate, really, that swap came in.
It was a magical storyline at conference when we saw it happen, and fucking Alan was freaking out, and Daft Mike was freaking out when it actually happened. So, like, listen, for that particular tournament, it was great, but you were right. Like, they were walking into this one, dead men walking, and I can't really blame them, to be honest. They're not a team you'd expect to be at Pro League. So, listen, credit to them for getting it this far. Different standards for different calibers. So, they deserve a little bit of praise, in my opinion, for making it through. So,
yeah.
Right, Group C saw Mouse going top end, Heroic and Complexity rounded out the top 3, and in the bottom 3 we saw Astralis, Ents and Heat going down. And I guess on terms of name value, Astralis could be considered to be the team that you would look at and think, oh, that sucks, isn't it? That shouldn't happen. But I think, guys, I think probably time to just say it, like, this team is not going to be the Astralis that we know and love, or the Astralis that we knew, at the very least, from the era sort of position. And that's to be expected when your best players have left the team, and when you're trying to rebuild in this sort of fashion. Like, it just isn't the same Astralis anymore. And just like a very poetic contrast, the fact that they were in the same group as Complexity last season, and now the roles are swapped, where Complexity make it forward, Astralis eliminated in their place. So, like, you know, how the tides have changed on this team. In terms of Astralis' position overall, like, they've been in very dire straits coming into Pro League. Like, even thinking about the RMR qualifiers, how they struggled in every single one of those brackets just to make it through in an online environment, and barely made it forward in the 4th qualifier for the RMR. It's just like, even from that basis to where they stand in terms of the group stage, like, Astralis do look a little bit dire for me. But that probably is because I'm comparing them to what Astralis, the name, stands for in the world of Counter-Strike. Like, is it fair to assess them as a not so great team anymore?
They've got a couple great pieces. I think Blame F still stands out every time, but then, you know, we do have to think about where that comes from. Is it good player and shit team, kind of like you're saying, or is it the fact that he's still taking a lot of the resources? It's probably the fact that he's taking a lot of the resources, but, you know, it's wild. They have a player like him, and then they've got, you know, Farley, who on the AWP is not fantastic, you know, where you need sort of fantastic AWPers to be competing at the top level. Config, you know, if we're just talking purely on the servers being, he's in the wrong sport, he thinks, but nonetheless, you know, it's been a really difficult sort of time, because he's mad inconsistent. He's very, very inconsistent, right? And I think that's again going to be a struggle when, and then it's like Zip is just fucking stealing check. He has the odd game where he looks all right, but, you know, that's obviously the joke, where he's just not really there anymore. What does he bring to the team? Before, it's like, okay, he was a great you know, end round scenario type player, and every now and then we see a spark of it, but it just seems like, you know, COVID took the wind out of his sails completely. People haven't figured out the game's totally different, etc., etc. So yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. I still feel like they should be knocking on the door to, like, top 10, but maybe as you're saying, the organization wants to be a bit further than that. And although we kind of joke about it a little bit, you know, Config is not going to be playing at the RMR. Probably not in the team anymore, technically speaking, if it's all to be believed what we're reading.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's going to be a very, very big hit. And then you sort of have, well, is Blame F Config like a little package thing? Are they like bros? Is Blame F going to be pissed off at his mate for binning it and also now not being in the team? Or can Blame F still sort of survive without him? Don't really know. But yeah, I just feel like you don't expect a lot out of this team at the same time.
No,
right? And we're starting to get some of these questions answered where it's like, right, how much of the era was on Glaive or Zonic? Zonix finding success and, ramped up. It took them a bit of time, but still looking better on Vitality now. Glaive and his boys, not so much. Not so much. Not even, making the playoffs of Pro League, which, as we've said, as we talked about, yeah, it's an open-ended group for sure. But the Bloody Tournament in and of itself is meant to allow for a bit of space to get through. If complexity are qualifying over you, you kind of have to ask some questions, ENCE, like, no offense to them, right? And it's obviously Halzerk's a great move. But ENCE have got the excuse where it's like, the newer additions, still fitting it in, pretty big hit to lose Spinks as he's going to, maybe start to look towards like a top 5 player of the year. But yeah, if complexity are making it over you, then I think Astralis have got some serious issues because they don't have that same sort of, oh yeah, we're a bit unstable. It's like, well, you're not. You should be good by now. This lineup's been together for a fair bit of time.
What I found a little interesting as well, I was just doing some stat digging about ESL Pro League, is that Astralis are actually in the top 5 of the most successful pistol rounds teams in this event, right? And so I know that's a super specific stat, but they've got one of the highest conversion rates. And I think when you look at the games that they're playing, even when they're winning, how close do these games get, right? Like, you beat ENCE 2-0, and the games are still 16-13, 16-11, right? You beat, of course, Mouse 2-0, 16-7, 16-14. Complexity beat you. It's 16-9, 25-23, 16-11. Like, I don't know how fine these numbers can get on Astralis. And sure, as I said, and as it's rightly pointed out, they're pretty good at pistol play, the pistol rounds and converting the pistols, and the follow-up percentages on top of that are pretty strong as well. It's just so terrible to see that we've pumped so much cash into this, right? Not to mention, I think, there's current speculation that Device is going back and whatnot, and the number supposedly that they sold to NIP for was, I think, 700,000-ish. Like, where has that money gone for Astralis? Like, some dude in the Astralis headquarters
straight in the pockets of Astralis, apparently.
Exactly that. He has just pocketed so much cash. Because, okay, sure, like, the pickups that they've made since the departure of Device have been pretty decent. I think when you look at the config Blame F duo, that is what Scribs described as a pretty strong one. Like, the successes at a team, you've just sold one of the hottest prospects at that time for a chunk of change. Yet, the money that we've seen here, sure, money doesn't buy success, but surely there's some players here that you can piece together, right? You look at, as we said, Zipnix, who's had a horrific event and all in all, a terrible time in this team now. Glaive maybe starting to lose his touch a little bit more so as well. If I'm honest with you, Farlig in this event wasn't too out there for me. I think he's not had a terrible, run of the grain in his life. I think he's playing a lot more of the slower roles, but he had a pretty decent time here. Maybe people are going to overlook him a little bit. But overall, like, how on earth have we made so much money off of selling one of the best players in tier 1, yet you are still crumbling and we are still not finding the pieces? And not to mention they sold Zonic, who was the best coach in the world at one point, to Vitality. So we're not even talking about the money they made there, yet we're still not even making it out of groups. It's a bit disappointing, but I do want to say as well, as much as we're sitting here and bashing Astralis, ENCE are in such a healthy position, yet they're even further down the table than Astralis in Group C. So I don't know, where there's slate of obviously the Astralis boys, ENCE have got a world full of hurt to recognize as well.
I don't know if it's as much hurt, to be honest. Like, because you have to think about about things from ENCE's perspective, right? Because ENCE, by comparison to Astralis, are not as big an organization, right? Astralis are this championship winning side who do incredible things and have had the best team ever in existence, right? Meanwhile, ENCE is still making moves with mitigating circumstances and are doing good business. And just talking to the guys over there, their mentality is not to win trophies, it's to, make money ultimately. And they're doing that well enough with their situation in the transfer market and still holding a place within those top little crop of teams in the world. So for me, I look at them thinking that in that sense, they're hitting their own goals and they've not really set the expectations that Astralis have. So yeah, you're right. The placements do indicate some dire situations because they went 1-4 in this group stage. But at the same time, it's like, it's a lesser fall from grace than what Astralis have had to do over the last year and a bit, 2 years, however long it's been since we've seen that big run, that when they established themselves as the greatest organization and the greatest team to ever touch Counter-Strike, basically.
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? I mean, one thing I will say about this group C, is that this was the one group where you looked at it and you could say, okay, literally anyone could qualify from this one, because
Yeah.
Heat have had their moments. Heat have, I mean, they beat Astralis in that group. Obviously, it might not be as a huge achievement as it once was, but Heat have had their moments. ENCE had the new roster, which was an unknown. Complexity overperformed, which I'm sure we'll all get onto in a minute.
Yes.
Heroic, for me, also overperformed. I was not a believer in Heroic whatsoever going into this group stage, and I obviously didn't get too far in the playoffs, but yeah, that was not one that I expected to see come off too well, even though I thought Yabi was the correct choice. I thought they would still be struggling, but yeah, I think Astralis finished in the right position, honestly, for the quality of their current team in that group. It's a tough one to say.
Yeah.
But Zip, as we've all spoken about, like, sure, he has his moments and he's playing all the terrible roles. Don't get me wrong. You don't expect him to frag these days, but you can just tell the way he is on that team and how he performs is just not the same anymore. And I mean, I'm not going to repeat what you guys have all just said, so I'll just go on to the next point and say, going into the RMR without config, the whole organization is just a mess right now. You don't know where the device is coming or going. You don't know what they're doing with config. There's been no official statement. Like, what on earth's going to be going on? And I think it would not surprise me to see a team like Astralis scrape through 3-2. I think there's genuinely good chance that they make it through. But I think, unlike previous years, there's just as big a chance that they bomb out rather than as much as they qualify from this one. And because, I mean, what was it, the last RMR? It was the game against Heat, was it, to qualify? And they only just scraped through that one, I think. Sort of broke the hearts of Heat. So I reckon this time there are more teams that are better than Astralis than there were then.
I was going to mention one more thing on the whole Astralis situation, right? I'm not sure, but you had to submit your stand-ins, right, and things like that before the issues that they had. So as far as I'm aware, I don't think even if they buy device, they can use him for this major, right? Like, I think that's well out of the equation now. So that's going to happen post-major. Config's gone. Like, if I'm honest, the bar is below what I think anyone else could imagine for me personally at this point. And if there was predictions for RMRs, I think, although it would be a bit of a troll one, there's every realm of opportunity where Astralis do very well, just because there's all the pressure in the world is off their backs. But there is every opportunity that they go 0-3 as well. Quite honestly, I have zero expectation for this team, and if I'm honest with you, they're becoming a second big for me, right? In dislike is a bit of a strong word. I don't dislike any teams. It's just that the Counter-Strike that they're playing and the pieces that we had and the results that we're getting from said pieces is just so disappointing. Like, I don't know how much shit you have to throw at them on Twitter to make a change. I don't know how much, like, worse Astralis can get to make a change. Not to mention, by the way, HLTV, as much as, you know, maybe it's done on points calculation, how the fuck are they number 4 in the world, by the way? Like, what?
Are
like,
they really?
They are number 4 in the world on the HLTV rankings. They are...
They should be 10th, 12th.
No, not even that.
12th.
Top 20 at most.
If Heroic are
Really?
12th, then I think they deserve to be
then
below Complexity, who are 19th. I'd say Eternal Fire beat them, so I'd put them 20th, 21st, whatever. They should be
good point.
in
I'll
the
agree
bin.
with that then. I'll agree with that then. Yeah, fair enough.
Just taking a look at the points breakdown right now, because I am actually curious to how they've actually weighted this up. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you consider, like, this. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a bad point to make there. I look, at the end of the day, like, Astralis are in a very tumultuous position at the moment, you know, obviously with all the behind-the-scenes aspects and things that are being reported on, the results aren't coming. I guess frustrations are definitely building. There is some real shithousery going on in that particular team, and it's all in the background of again, what should be a great name in Counter-Strike, which is why I think we're treating them quite harshly. Be that fair or not, that's definitely like a conversation, a deeper conversation to have in terms of philosophy. But personally, like, you know, I'm not going to give Manchester United a break because of XYZ mitigating factors. They're fucking MU, you know, like, same thing for Astralis. They're fucking Astralis. This should be an amazing team. So yeah, I mean,
that's fair.
That's the way that I see things. Scriv, anything you want to say about Astralis before we move on?
I mean, look, it just, you know, unfortunately, I think I'm sort of with you where, like, they should be doing a lot more. Don't really know. Well, I mean, you kind of do know where the money's gone from a business perspective, but it'd be nice to see them be a bit more like bothered, you know?
Yeah. Someone's having a nice holiday.
And a face needs to sort of come forward and be like, this is unacceptable, you know, whatever. We're going to make some changes, you know, the old Jason Lake. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have too much else to add on top of what you guys have said, to be honest. Just want a bit more from this organization and from this team. And I don't know that we're going to get it in the short term, probably not until the new year at least.
Now, changes got to be made for me personally before we see any major differences, and those could be forced out by them, but I don't even think it's the right change to make considering the circumstances. So we'll leave that there with Astralis. Let's talk about Mouse next, because I didn't really have them down to go in the first place position. I know that, Trav, you were saying that you wouldn't expect Heroic to be all that great. I honestly had them down as the top team in the group, honestly, right. When you consider, like, obviously, with how situations worked out, you mentioned, obviously, how this, you know, the group could have been won or lost by anybody. It was really a free-for-all. But of all the teams I thought that had the best chance of going first, I honestly didn't think it was Mouse. I thought it was going to be Heroic. But Mouse had a very respectable run in the groups, especially. Taking that first place position is obviously massive for them, but just acknowledge that as well, they've gone through all these changes as of late, and they've started to replace older parts of the roster, promote players up from the academy team. And Mouse historically have had one of the best academy sides in the entire scene. So for them, it kind of makes sense, but I didn't think it would output as amazingly as it did before. So I'm generally just impressed. You know, like I'm really impressed with how well they did. I had them going through at like third place, but probably not first for me.
Yeah, I mean, hilariously, the only loss that they had was against Astralis, which feels quite funny. In the sense
all well, that group, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
it's the
exactly.
group, isn't it? We mentioned the group. Like, it's just it was a free-for-all group. Anyone could be anyone in that group, and it kind of proved its worth in the end.
Yeah,
weirdly.
I guess that's true. I definitely will say though, the thing about Miles for me is compared to a lot of the other teams, maybe Heroic's the other one, right? And it sort of is quite fitting that they both get through, and it's only really like, you know, the round difference that separates their spots. And I guess, yeah, Miles on the head-to-head, I suppose, as well. But it feels like Miles and Heroic as well, you know, small in brackets, probably the most stable teams within that group. You know, they have made some moves recently, but Miles, it's kind of a funny one, and we'll see where this, you know, academy team kind of vibe comes in. Like, obviously, a lot of the players are familiar with Xerxan as he comes into the roster. So... yeah, I am quietly impressed. I think that this was the perfect group and the perfect time for them to maybe indeed show themselves and overperform a little. I don't know whether they'll be able to keep this going. And I do feel as well with these young players who are very hungry and all this sort of stuff, I think that there will kind of come a time that we look back and we're like, maybe it's that old honeymoon period we used to talk about quite a lot. Because I think, being into it, being, you know... really forward thinking and all that sort of stuff is going to affect their performance, is going to affect the way that they approach things. Whereas it gets difficult or they get into the big games, you know, and I think Xerxan even said, like in the interview afterwards and whatnot, that he was pretty nervous going into it, and so were some of the other guys. And I think those are the types of things that are going to hold them back. I would actually be very, very curious. I don't know that they would have beat Fnatic, for example, if they placed a little bit lower in their group, you know, and them and Liquid were like flipped or whatever. So yeah, I feel like that's sort of a bit of a curious case that the finishing first gave them such a leg up that they were able to, you know, look better than perhaps they should have done.
Personally, I would have said as well, considering we had so many pieces of the Mouse NXT puzzle come up to the main roster, I think a lot of discussion, and correctly made, was, do we see a return? Obviously, MBK was on the bench at that time, right? And it was the question of, do we see MBK come back? I would have loved to have seen MBK work with these individuals, because I think when you look at the stats as a whole for Mouse at this event, it's really nice to have that breath of fresh air where actually these teams are doing ever so well with the younger talent, right? And I'm not sure if you have it to hand, Jay, to see the level that Mouse have been playing at with the young guns. There was a lot of question marks. You know, does JDC actually do well on this roster? You know, how do things go? If you look, like, we have the top performers more or less are the younger players. So for me personally, I was like, yo, if MBK comes back and replaces Dexter, who, as you can see, was clearly the weakest link at this event, like, what's to say that these guys can't go run rings around the, around these guys with MBK nurturing the talent? I've got to give it to them, though. Even when Dexter stuck around, my God, has he put in a performance with this team. And to get to the stage that they're at, sure, I think MBK was super exciting. Dexter's done a really good job at working with these young individuals. JDC's found form. A lot of people, especially those HLTV threads, which I love to have a little read about, were saying, get rid of JDC. He's the weakest link by far. I think he shut a lot of the haters up. It's nice to see Zertian fragging out as well. I remember he was like the topical point of Mouse NXT. Yeah. I think everyone loves him, right? He's just so good at the game. Torzy as well. Sure, he's a bit in the red at this event, but obviously Frozen's going to be number one. But the next three are your young guns. I think you expect Dexter to be plumb last in this team, but the fact we've got 2 players above a 1.0 HLTV and Torzy isn't far off the mark either. Like, these guys as a whole in this event have really surprised me with how well these young players have dealt with the pressures of playing.
Retro's just dropped from the Discord.
He's been shut down.
Hello.
He's back. He's back.
The Discord died. Mate, I was setting up the point. I was being like, wow, well played. Sick stuff. Discord says no. But no, I think you know my point, right? Is that Mouse NXT players, now in the main roster, they've been shutting a lot of speculators up.
Well, I do have to give credit to Dexter in the sense that, like, I do feel like he's led this team appropriately, because I take a look at numbers like what you saw from there, and I do think that that's not a team that should be making it as well as they did in that group stage, honestly. You mentioned the one loss to Astralis, and then it wins against everybody else, and you see that there's still players like the Mayan Orpa, Torzy, who goes red. By the way, Torzy is definitely much better than what those numbers imply. This wasn't the best event for him. I guess probably those land blues or that, like, that nervousness. I think this is his first LAN, if memory serves me correctly. So like we're talking about like some players that aren't as experienced as what you'd like to see out of a pro league team, but Dexter still brought them together to be able to be better than what the ratings seem to indicate. And yes, they did fall to Liquid, so I guess that's appropriate given how experienced that team is by comparison. I think that definitely plays a bigger factor. I'm not sure that NBK is the right player to bring in places of Dexter, though. Like, you're right about him having IGL experience, but his previous history hasn't always been that amazing in that role. So you have to sort of, I think, get like a bit more of a truer IGL in that sense. Someone within the European scene who could, as you mentioned, nurture these guys up. Someone with a lot of experience, especially like a much more an older guy, because I don't think this is going to lead to long-term success. If you keep replacing all of the star elements and the older guys with just young guns and hoping for the best on firepower, you're not going to go as far as Mouse Sports did in this one. I do think that this was a bit more of an outlier when you consider the stats and such. But I am hoping that there is a future ahead of these guys, because some of these players are just absolutely nuts and they have bright futures ahead of them in their individual careers. The question is it going to be a great career on Mouse for now?
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, right? Like what they did with, I mean, you probably pointed it out before earlier, but like what they've done with Bemis. Like he had one of his better events at Cologne, right? He finally stepped up, and that's what pushed Mouse to playoffs for the first time in however long, especially at an event where they've had pretty poor luck in the past. So yeah, I think now he's out in the cold a bit. Unfortunately, it's a move that makes sense, as we say. I mean, Zertian, he was the natural upgrade and natural progression from the academy team without a shadow of a doubt. But yeah, I would just feel for Bemis, and obviously it makes you wonder with what they did, as you also said, to MBK as well when he was on the roster. How willing they are to drop players at the click of a finger. So I can only hope that these guys, as you say, including Bemis, of course, who's now been sort of sidelined and is only a sub for the RMR after how he probably thought he was going to be involved. I think he tweeted about how he only found out via social media or something ridiculous. Or no, actually, he found out by joining a TS server for a
and they said they were gone.
And they said he was gone. So that's just horrible. Like I feel bad for them, and I just hope it doesn't happen to any of these future Mouse players. And at least they have, as Jay said, like a career elsewhere after Mouse.
I mean, just forgetting about that, that's like a future thing. Like, I think that honestly, if they continue, replacing players with the attitude that you just mentioned there, Trav, then that possibly could cripple confidence and maybe dismantle that future in potential. I mean, I'm not sure what the mental state and psyche of these players are, but that's a true possibility when you consider how young they are, how early their careers are. They've come up through the Mouse Academy system. They have a lot of faith and trust in the Mouse side. So it is a speculation point to sort of point out if they continue making those changes. But I think we're all in agreement the fact that they need a guiding hand. They need someone to steer them in the right direction, be that the coach, be that preferably the IGL personally. Like if you're sitting in server and you've had all this great playing experience at the top end, then that's, I think, going to be much more valuable to players at this stage in their career. So again, I'm just not sure who that player is going to be. So like, outside of NBK, we've already thrown out there, like who do we feel like could have been that player or could be that player to come in, take the IGL role and bring these players up in the right fashion? Any ideas?
Difficult one.
I mean, maybe you just kind of give Dexter more time.
Maybe.
Okay.
To be honest, I feel like now, again, he's finally getting a few pieces that it seems like he's had a bit more of a voice in, and they're hitting some stability, and it's a really great position because I think that when he comes across, it's a very untested region. And I don't know that even just kind of subconsciously, they might be trying to work, but I don't know that he necessarily pulls the respect of all the players that, he's played with over his tenure at Mouse. But now, got these young guys and they're brought up on, the team structure, and they did that for a while. Cyclone's their boy, calling the shots behind the scenes. And I feel when it's like, right, you got to listen to the boss, you got to fully buy into this. And I think that they are indeed a little bit more on board than some of his other pieces have been in the past. So I think actually it might not be a question of change. It might just be a question of sitting and believing at least a little bit longer. It does get difficult, right? Because he's also a bit more aged, isn't he, Dexter, as well? So you have that to kind of consider. But yeah, I think another year or so, I could say you'd maybe give him 6 to 12 months pretty comfortably.
Yeah, that's always an interesting
that.
subject, isn't it? One that has I think has been discussed a lot, but also there's no definitive answer to, is the how much time do you give a new team, and how long is too long and how short is too short, about how much you have to wait for success. And I sometimes think that in this era where I feel like it really is a high, especially at the highest level, it's like aim is a big factor, but teamwork is so huge now compared to how it used to be a few years ago. Just in general, I feel like more time you leave it, unless there's serious issues with like personality clashes, etc., the longer you leave it, the better you're going to get. And I think, you need to give teams that especially are this young plenty of time to get some success, because we have seen teams that have sort of been languishing in tier 2 for a long time. Finally, they have one decent event, then you sort of get some invites for the future, and then they start progressing. It happened with Copenhagen Flames. It's going to happen with maybe I'm predicting that it might happen with one win as well. We've seen ridiculous performances from Deco online. Whether he transfers that to LAN, for example, is another question. But just teams like that, I think if you give them time, it all depends on whether the organizations are patient, obviously, because money can be lost. But yeah, I think time is important for sure.
All right, well, we'll give them some time in that sort of sense. A team that have taken their time in terms of getting success has been Complexity. This is, look, the year has not been kind to this organization and to this team overall. Obviously, in the wake of that whole juggernaut, things weren't looking all that fantastic for them. And over the course of the year, we were just seeing last places and second last places and all sorts of bollocks for them. But this time they did it. They made playoffs for once. So, I mean, first of all, congratulations, boys, because it's been a very long time coming. Secondly, is this going to be a consistent thing now for this Complexity side?
No.
Oh.
No.
I'm gonna jump straight in. No way, mate. No way. I think when you look at this team, though, they have a pretty good chance maybe in the upcoming RMRs. simply said I think they're still the core, right, that can play in North America.
Yes.
They're in like the NA qualifiers. So maybe in the RMR we can hold them accountable. I think when you look at the stats as well, there are some very obvious pieces that people on Twitter have been screaming at them for a little while now that something's got to change. I think for JT and Fang, another terrible event for Fang as an individual. Maybe that's going to be something we talk about later on with this specific team. But for me, I think the big wow factor was Halzerk and Grim this event, and the stats won't lie. Grim was an animal on the server throughout the group stage and a little bit in playoffs, to be fair to him. I think that's one of the strongest performances I've seen out of a player in a little while when it comes to sort of an underdog story. The fact that he's 0.01 off of a 1.2 in that sense is insane to me. I think when you look at the stats as well overall, he's probably one of the highest performing players in the entirety of that event, right? Just a brilliant job from him as an individual. But
About
I think
time.
you've yes, agreed, about time. But I think when you look at this team as a whole, how rocky it's been for them as a team. Okay, sure, we get a spot of success. Now I'm kind of like, you can't expect it a second time. For me, this feels like big of NA, right? Where it's like, cool, you get one event in. Admittedly, it's at LAN, things are hype. You got to remember at the same time, though, the only reason why they got in is because Heroic beat Astralis. And that was like the whole setup for that final day, was that if Heroic lose, Complexity don't get it. And so as much as I'm happy for them, obviously, that they get there and they make the playoffs, and to be fair to them, yeah, it didn't look too bad against FaZe Clan. At the same time, I've kind of got to point fingers and be like, you got in on the skin of your teeth. You are very lucky to be in that position in the first place. Not to mention, you have two very inconsistent players that are very in the red on that team. So for me, it's not a matter of if this team wants to perform. It's if JT and Fang show up, they actually are a pretty good side. But, you know, history repeats itself time and time again. Fang specifically is a player that I'm going to dig into a little bit. And, you know, although he's a pretty nice player on Twitter and whatever, he hasn't had a great time, nor has JT, and Twitter has been screaming at them for just making that change. I look at JT's stats, he's 0.9 over the past 3 months. That's terrible for someone that's meant to have such impact as well.
Okay.
You've got to look at different options. Go on, Trav.
Retro,
You're gonna rattle me off a bit here.
I need to throw you this one for a second. Hang on a second. Hooksy. I know you probably have your thoughts about Hooksy.
Yeah.
But he has a worse rating than JT.
Yeah, but for me, it's like,
and they're doing good.
They're very much in different cycles, though, aren't they? Like JT,
Okay.
How long has he been in this roster for now? He joined on the 18th of the 1st, 2022. So he's had the best part of the year to really settle himself in, Trav. Hooksy's been in, what, for a few months? Not even that.
I agree. Yeah,
And,
I mean, it makes sense. I get you.
And he's probably wanting to bring like some of his ideas. It's definitely a different change for him. JT, man, it's about time he steps up. You know, he's just so, I don't know.
His
I do
rating's
agree
fine.
with you.
I actually going to
okay. All right.
I'm going to very politely disagree and say that I think his rating is fine for a team of that caliber. I think it's more on Fang. I agree with the Fang part. I think if Fang gets like, if Grim falls off a little bit and Fang is the one to step up, then this team's fine. I think that consistency, I agree, they can be will be a problem.
You are right. Yeah.
I do agree. I'm completely on board with that. I would not be surprised if your prediction is correct that they will fall off in the future. But I do think they'll make it through the NARMR, and I do think they're on the right track, at least for now. And if Grim continues playing well in these roles that he's got now.
I think back to the players that they had beforehand, though, that they could have replaced Fang with. Like, I'm looking at the people that they've had on their squad in the past, right? You've got Esatag, Blame F, JKS was in the roster for a bit. Like, how on earth JKS wasn't put in after the standing performance he had at the beginning of this year, I will never understand. Probably pocketed a bit off of the G2 buyout. But at the same time, like, I think you are right, Travis. Maybe I'm giving a little bit too much hate to the wrong person here. JT, of course, is the IGL, if you didn't know. For those at home, so maybe it's a bit understandable that he's a little more on the inconsistent side since he's calling the shots. He's 23 years old as well. Maybe he's got a bit ahead of him. But for Fang, like, come on, dude, you're an entry fragger. Sure, maybe it's not the most luxury roles. He's even younger. He's 20. But you can't be dropping negative results throughout this entire event and still get through groups. which they got through on the skin of their teeth. Me personally, I'm saying Complexity probably make it through to the RMR, but I do not see them getting past the challenger stage. I will draw that line there.
Yeah, it's a really tough one for me. I think you have to be careful these days with IGLs. There's a drought, I guess, of them, to be fair, and especially in America, and sort of useful ones. And then although they're maybe not as structured, but you have to look at like a team like Na'Vi, where it's like actually their numbers could be deemed a little bit better. Retro dead again, but whatever, we'll fill him in when he gets back. Hope he's okay, but yeah, no, I don't know, man.
Thumbs up. He's fixing Discord right now.
Okay, all right, cool.
What is going on with Retro today, man? I don't
I
know
have no
if
idea.
he seemed like he can hear us. I don't know if he can. Oh, he can hear us. Oh no, he can't. I can't tell. You started nodding his head at that moment. So sorry.
Is in
yeah,
the bin.
yeah. We'll get him back on in a second. But you can see his camera though, so we can just sort of just watch. There he is. He's back.
Hello. Mate, I don't know what's going on as well. Like, it's not even like the internet's dropping. It's just Discord sucks ass, dude. I don't know what to say, really.
I'll have to steal your TeamSpeak for the next show then, Retro.
You're more than welcome, man. More than welcome.
Scrib, you were saying.
Yeah, so I feel like you have to look at Na'Vi, right, and they've switched up in-game leaders, electronics bring in bigger numbers and all that sort of stuff. And I know that they're more a structured-based team, but still, you have to be very careful, I think, these days with like moving players in and out, just not necessarily fully based off of numbers. I get it, but I think that JT is maybe bringing a bit more to the team. And yeah, I don't know, man. We are in this world where like a few of the IGLs have moved back and are not fragging as heavily, and it asks a lot more from the other individuals in the team, which again just goes back to what both of you guys have agreed on. And I think that we can all probably jump on that and agree is that a player like Fang needs to be doing a lot more. And for me, I feel like he would definitely be the easier move to make, just because he's meant to bring the numbers and he's not bringing the numbers. He doesn't bring there's the intangibles or whatever, but he doesn't bring the IGL level to the team, which clearly I think is quite important for this squad. They've changed up the AWPer. That seems to have fit, but they work on a very loose kind of style, it looks like. So I think that having an IGL that's comfortable with that is pretty important.
Well, there's an interesting dynamic to throw in there then, boys. If we're so dead set on replacing Fang as an entry fragger, who do we get in his place? And there's an extra restriction also to add to this, because obviously Complexity made the move to the North American scene. I think that they're dead set on being a North American team. Who do we get in his place? Like who are we gonna find to replace Fang or to change up the situation?
Yeah.
I know that we're not as in tune with the North American scene as everybody else is, but from what we know, like how difficult of a task would this be?
I don't know. Does anyone know the exact rulings, whether JT or the RMR qualifiers stand? Like, is JT eligible to play in the NA qualifiers? Does it work on cores?
I think it works on cores.
Because if it's core based and JT is not allowed to play in the NA RMR qualifiers, I think it becomes considerably more difficult, because of course you have it depends, because if he is, then you can obviously take a European approach. But if it's Fang, Floppy, and Grim that hold up like the NA RMR spot technically, then obviously you're bogged down to just NA players, in which I don't think there is a massive opportunity to exploit. Maybe you look at ECL a little bit more for NA and look at the higher performers there, and you keep your eye and scout out maybe some of the younger talent, because if there's anything we've learned in Europe, and this team in particular haven't taken on, it's someone with little to no experience that shoots back, right? And I think back to the glory days of even in this specific group this time around, where we've got G2 that hold up Munacy, we've got, in Mal's, you've got 3 players that are very, very young. Maybe Cloud9's a little bit of an outlier in vitality in that sense as well. But I feel like a lot of the top team these days are rolling the dice on much younger players. So whether we want to take a more NA approach, maybe that's waiting to happen. Do you maybe look at the EG boys in any sense and have a look there? Or, even then, ATK, is there anyone in the mix there that you want to have a look at? Maybe Motum, Swisher, I don't know, like the crossovers there. But if you want to stick to your roots, I think there's a lot of opportunity. You just got to keep your eye on it a little bit more. I don't think, again, this is kind of like the same scenario that we drew up earlier with Mouse. I don't think there's anyone with an immediate replacement that would take a big kick and a good effect on this team. But I could definitely see something happening. Maybe you lads will agree later down the line, where if these results continue, someone has to go. And I think the fingers point to him. And however that RMR slot looks and however the qualifiers work out to be, if they can pick up someone from Europe, I think there is a bag of changes that team can make. Not to mention its complexity, man. The pockets are deep in that organization. So sky's the limit. If G2 can have Monacy, like, complexity could go for another EU prodigy and just wipe the floor with the European scene. And with how well Holzer's been playing in this roster, I think there's every opportunity that maybe these guys look Europe.
I don't know about that one. I think it carries a considerable amount of risk considering how deep and great Europe is overall.
You reckon?
And I reckon so. Not without revamping the core of the team for my money. Would it work out as well for complexity? But at this point, we're kind of like, running the topic down. We do need to move on because we are a little bit short on time. Still in the group stage, Group D. We'll start talking about these guys here. Cloud9, of course, topped it out. Furia, Liquid in the second and third place positions. EG, Eternal Fire, Movistar Riders out and eliminated. Poor Evil Geniuses. Oh dear. Another group stage exit for these boys. And look, at least it's better than what it was before for them. We're not agreeing on that. Look.
No.
I mean, bro, they hadn't had a win at Pro League in like fucking 4
exactly.
seasons.
Okay. Like strictly
it's
speaking,
like the bar
it's an
is
improvement.
incredibly low.
It's true. It's true. They did suck even more.
Something that me and Dwayne were talking about is sort of like entertaining the conversation of, are they moving in the right direction now? Because obviously, like, the drama surrounding the roster and surrounding the team was fucking just so silly, and it was holding them back very clearly. Like you mentioned, Skriv, like no great match wins, let alone tournament wins or tournament progression, and at that point you're missing out the basic and fundamentals of having a decent team. So in that sense, I think taking a look at Evil Geniuses, like, we have to entertain that question: are they moving in the right direction from now?
I
think so.
They're okay. Yeah,
okay.
I'll say quickly. I'll just give 1 point to sort of kick you guys off. I think Nilan is underrated. Honestly, a lot of people will be like, in EU and only concentrate on tier 1. Like, who the flying hell is this guy? Like, I'll just have no clue at all.
You can say flying fuck, mate. Don't worry. It's not.
Who the flying fuck is this random cunt? Like, who the hell is this guy? But honestly, I think he's fine, and I think he has a good enough brain to be able to help these players through. And of course, I think he's got pretty good English, from what I understand as well, which is obviously critical. But anyway, I'll let you guys get onto your points now after my little burst of swearing that I was allowed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. The thing for me with the EG team and sort of are they heading in the right direction, the fact that they're sort of moving away. I don't know if anyone looked at that, initial EG roster where it's like, yo, we got Stewie, we got Tim back from Valorant, and anyone was like, wow, this team's gonna be good. Everyone was like, why? What is the, and you can kind of, it's like, okay, maybe they have like numbers and followings and, so you want to do it that way and try and build from the ground. And there has been an awful lot of, and now we're going to sign 2 more teams. And it's like, again, why? What are you doing here? Are you rotating people in? Is it some sort of academy thing, but you're not going to be playing in the academy league, and all this. So it was a really weird, path from the new management, let's say. But at the very least, in terms of games, in terms of the way they look on the server and whatnot, I'd say they're moving in the right direction. Still not a fantastic team, still battling to be top 4 in NA. But like, at the very least, because some of those early games, man, were just like, what is going on? You know what I mean? You watch them and be like, these guys won majors, and then you see that it's like, oh, okay, they're not listening to like practice, they're not really, and it's like, man, it's not me that's the problem, it's the game. Why do people play like idiots now, and all this kind of stuff? It's like, there was just so much of that, and it does seem like a little bit of a revamp of the squad. You've got, a bit more energy in there, a bit more will to, and a bit more kind of, I'm sure they've had a conversation and sat down and be like, right, you guys are here, we're at our wits' end with it. You guys are just here to sort of piss about. We'll put you on Team C or whatever, and you can stream, and, you can maybe give a bit of knowledge and farm some ECL games. But if you actually want to get back to that level of form, get back to arguably being, the top NA team, if not for a little while they were there, like a top 3 team in the world for a couple months or whatever it was. If you want to get back there, then stick with us. And it seems like the energy has definitely dialed up a little bit. But this is part of the problem. This is part of the problem. You're at the North American org. You got a fair bit of money, supported out by the league team or whatever. And it can get a bit easy to just rest on your heels and be like, well, it'd be nice to win, but you know what else is nice? 30 grand a month, and I think that they lose some of that motivation sometimes.
Thanks for the info, Smoothie, by the way.
Yeah.
Plus one.
Yeah. My guy. I think I'm going to have a little bit more of a sour take on the EG lads. I'm going to give them a pretty hard time. I think, as you guys rightly pointed out, it is definitely a leg up over whatever the hell they were doing in the previous 3 seasons of Pro League, right? I think there's actually a clause in the contracts for Pro League, sort of being a partner, is that if you don't win a game in 3 seasons, the whole thing is looked at and you could lose your slot effectively. So it's nice to see, we've finally knocked down some pins on that EG camp, but at the same time, how long have we been waiting for them to do this? And as Scrooge said, you have pretty deep pockets when it comes to the owners. Players probably looking a little bit demotivated. This event as a whole, Cirque's dropped a 0.89 Hext, who obviously is a young gun, and he's came up from one of the BC teams, whatever the hell. Whatever the hell they want to call them. He's had, his big debut performance for this team, and a 0.94 is pretty respectable when you jump so high up in terms of the level of team play. So I'd like to see him being given a little bit more time. As a whole, Breeze and Automatic are rounding out the sheets as sort of the top 2 for this team. But for me, EG feel like they're there for the namesake, and this is definitely not a title winning team. I think everyone here will agree, holy hell, if you've got such an amount of money and the promise from EG from buying these teams is we want to build up some sick roster in North America. Let's do it. Let's see how it goes. And you've brought in 2 more EG rosters, and you said, we're going to give them boot camps. We're going to, train them up. Basically, it feels like they're tuning them up to be machines, right? And be we are giving you everything to become good players. The fact that we're 4th place, and sure, maybe we haven't given the most amount of time to this team as of right now, I don't know, man. I think that you've really got to start looking at this team. And for any organization, you don't build a team to be second best. You build a team to win titles. And this team is not a title-winning team. And so no matter how much, you want to give them whatever platform you want them to stand on, I mean, fuck it, give them a map up in a best of 3 against Na'Vi or Faze. And I guarantee you still lose. You still lose the games. It's just a bit disappointing because I look at the maps, and maybe the game against Cloud9 was the one that I wanted to highlight as the close one. Obviously, it was 16-12 on Inferno. Then they get smacked on Dust 2. Liquid dish out the same punishment. You play against Furia as well, 16-12, 16-11. You beat Movistar Riders and Eternal Fire, which in my opinion, you should be beating as, if you want to take the name as value. I don't know, man. I think you've really got to give these guys a bit of a hard time, because how long have we been waiting for this EG side to get results? And they've been getting results, but this is not a team that is going to deliver to the highest degree. So I don't know, man. I think you've got to look at this team in 2 ways. One, sure, they're definitely on the up and they're getting results. But on the other hand, Complexity are one of the bigger names that we have in Counter-Strike in terms of, net worth and the money's sake. And definitely in terms of goals, it feels like we were promised the dream when they signed these 2 rosters. So, if you want to look as a main thing, the next 2 rosters are playing in ESL Challenger League. One went to Frag and, did okay. I just got to look at this and one
two went to Frag, Brev.
Well, but one of them didn't do well at all.
Right. But it was a conflict of interest drama.
Yes, of course.
Nothing wrong with that, of course.
No, of course. Well, I meant one team did well at Frag, the other one not so much.
Fair.
And as a whole, you can't, especially with the teams that are going to Frag, we haven't even got a good taste for Europe. And the fact that the teams that are going to Frag aren't even shooting properly, and all of the stuff that's happening there, dude, I don't know, man. You got to look at this. Hot take is Complexity will suck absolute arse, and they will continue to do so.
As well.
Sorry, yes, EG, and yes. Sorry, I'm getting hung up, man. There's so much shit to throw.
It's a North American team. I'll give you
NA
the
fucking
pass.
sucks, bro. There you go. That's it. There, Liquid did amazing. Besides that, yeah, man, just look at your scene. It's
I
embarrassing.
I have to jump in quickly. I do love that analysis as well of like there are teams at Frag shooting properly. I think
Bro,
gotta start
like,
using that one, bro.
it's like Big Academy and Apex are going. Apex made changes. Big Academy, fair enough, but they're an Academy team, dude. Like, they're not even playing in these big events. They're not even getting that experience. And the fact that in an NA event, like, none of these teams are showing up and doing justice. I mean, sure, maybe we're not looking at the right EG team, but for EG and Complexity as a whole, Complexity, fair enough, you got through, but it was on round difference. EG don't even make it out of the groups. It's just embarrassing from my POV. Like, there you go. My rant's over. I'm infuriated.
The beauty of Nuance is that I can still agree with you, but stand by my side of things. I still think Evil Geniuses are at least making the right moves. Personally, if I'm in their shoes, I'm putting resources into EG Black and White to try and find some sort of answer to the main team at this point, just because, like, what other fucking options do you have? Like, like, they're really, like, pinned in a corner at the moment. Like, there's not much that you can do to make an immediate fix and like make EG great again in an instant. Like, this is going to take some time to have any sort of success, because like the roster's been so fucked up for so long that, yeah, okay, for now, the trimming the fat, bringing Nealon in to play his style has already made some significant improvements to start, but as Scriv was mentioning, the bar is already so low. So look, we've taken the first step, at least for Evil Geniuses, and now the case of what those next steps will be answered in the months to come. Obviously, they'll be competing in the RMR. Will they make it through? Quick yes or no, boys?
Nah.
2-3.
2-3.
2-3.
I was gonna go 1-3 personally, but you know.
I think you already know my choice at least.
0-3 is what Retro's going.
If you could go 0-5 in the Swiss, that would be the team I'd put there, just to spite me.
Oh my gosh. You wake up a hater, don't you, Retro?
Oh man, hater is an understatement to how much I am disappointed in this team. It's not. Do you know what? It's not even hate. It's just an immense disappointment, honestly.
Right, well, speaking of disappointments, the other two teams that were eliminated, one of which was Movistar Riders from Group D. And I guess it's a very similar story with mitigating circumstances. The fact that they obviously, like, you know, sold one of their big players in some Pius, who was an absolute star. So I'm willing to forgive them a little bit, but at the end of the day, they did go 0-5. And I didn't think it would be that much of a loss for Movistar, boys.
Bro.
I made a point to Scriv, didn't I? I spoke to you about it the other day, mate, didn't I? About how I think there's a combination of, it's not just the Sun Pius thing. Sure, that was a big factor, but and Sun Pius's consistency is a lot better than Martinez's, for example. And I think that makes a huge difference. But with Movistar's run, they won ESL Challenger Valencia. They are on a huge high. They carry that through and make playoffs in Cologne in front of the biggest crowd they will probably ever play in front of in their entire career. There's going to be a natural come down from that performance. And I think we saw a combination of losing Sun Pius and the natural regression that this Movistar Riders team was going to have anyway. So I think it was inevitable that they were going to struggle in Pro League for me.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. I was just very surprised. I feel like they looked kind of okay, and everyone was like, yo, Martinez in this opening matchup, like, it could do it. They took a map off Liquid, could do a bit of something. And then I think it was the Furia game, they like picked Ancient, right, which is one of their sort of, if not their favorite map. And they got ruined. It's like 16-3, 16-4, something like that. And then it just seemed like it was just a trajectory that just kept going down, and they lost like energy, and they just looked dejected. And you know, then after the Furia game, they had Cloud9, you know, and by the time their two most winnable games in EG and Eternal Fire rocked up, they were already kind of out of the running. So, a little bit unfortunate in that sense, but also they just looked so out of it, man, you know, like they really just did not look like they wanted to be there past a certain point.
I was gonna say, maybe I'm just a bit of a hater today, but I've got to think back to the roster. Obviously, as you said, the deep run that they had in Cologne, right?
Yeah.
4 out of the 5 players on this roster were in that run for Cologne. The only change we have is Martinez, which is a bit of a downgrade on, some pious, I think everyone will agree with. But no way you should be going from making that playoff stage to bombing out in groups dead last, not winning a single series. Not to mention, apart from FTW, which was expected, they have the worst round difference out of everyone in the group stage. I think that kind of proves testament. The fact that you kick things off and you take a map off of Liquid, who obviously go on to go second place in the entire event, is pretty respectable. As Scriv then rightly pointed out, like Ancient, you pick, you start T-side, you go 15-0 down, you lose the map 16-3. And then obviously it's quite close on Nuke, but again, it's like you lose 2-0, then you lose to Cloud9. And as Scriv said, by then, like your time's gone. Like you had a really good chance to kick things off with a bang in the opening matchup with Liquid. You go 1-2, and then there's a real chance of redemption with Furia, and you throw it all away. It feels like, again, we're looking at a very, very promising team in the first half of the year. Now in the second, it's another question of where do you place them? Because you've still got 80% of that roster that made the dreamlike run that I think we'll talk about at least for the next 6 months on that Movistar Riders side. But then you want to compare it to the most recent event they just had. The fact that you are dead last in this entire event in terms of your group, I don't know, man. I think you've got to give it a bit of time. You've got to allow the Martinez change to maybe ripen a little bit more. But this certainly doesn't set a good precedent heading into the RMR. And although maybe a lot of the pressure's off them and that's going to work in their favor, I feel like you've got to look at the harshness, and that is you've got 4 very capable players. The Spaniards, obviously, Mopos, Alex Death, Stavy G. Same coach as well, and yet we are dead last in our group. I think that is the tone that I want to take here.
Yeah.
As well, I think Des had a big overperformance in some of those Cologne matches as well. I don't think he really performed way and above the expectations I ever had of him. And yeah, I also am on board with the fact that sure, you have 4 of the same riflers, and that is the majority core of the roster. But riflers are, by nature, I mean, everyone is, but that sort of core, it can be very inconsistent. And while Mopos, I think, for example, has been on that team for about 5 years. I think he's one of the longest tenured players currently still in the scene. You've got like a Liege on Liquid, Crimson Fnatic, and Mopos on Movistar Riders. And of course, Tabson on Big, who we discussed earlier. That consistency can go up and down. And he had a very, very poor performance in Pro League. The game I got to cast, my one game with Scriv, was the 2-0. Eternal Fire beat them in that final game, and Eternal Fire basically had to win that 2-0. They did, and Mopos was really, really poor. So I think everyone was just a bit tired, and it was just not looking good, because I think they now know that maybe that little mini era that they had of being a top 4 contender at big events is unfortunately over.
Yeah, I mean, look, kind of sucks at the end of the day, but I think, as you were saying, Trav, like, for Movistar Riders, it kind of was a bit of an expectation. So back to tier 2 we go. Let's see where they go and rebuild from here. Another team that will be heading back to tier 2 very quickly. I want to touch on this one for Eternal Fire, because Trav, I know that you wanted to talk about this team in some capacity. Personally, like, I don't really see much else that I can personally add, because during the pick and post show when we did for the major, you were saying, Trav, that this team are kind of stuck in a dead end themselves, because they are from the Turkish scene. They're kind of locked into the Turkish scene because of the nature of the organization and of the players themselves, and there isn't a lot of talent that they can dip into to sort of make improvements. So I kind of feel like, entering this Pro League, great that they were able to do it, but it's kind of within par of what we've seen from them in the past, right? So what's the angle that you want to take on this team?
Well, the interesting one for me is that I had the opportunity to cast a lot of their run through the ESL Challenger Rotterdam qualifier. They made their way all the way through the lower bracket, beating some really quality tier 2 teams like, Sprout, One Win, Forza. They only lost 1 map in that entire lower bracket run. And I sort of went into watching their Pro League campaign and thought to myself, okay, I think this team can do something, because you rightly say, I did mention, like, where do they go in terms of talent? Well, at that point, I did not think they'd be getting Paz and Major back from Valorant at all. Paz has been struggling, but he's 1, rusty, 2, in the roles that xFloud was in, which are some of the worst roles on that roster. They give all the ecos go to Xantares and Woxic and Major. Really, that's just a fact of the matter. Paz gets none of them. But point I want to touch on is Major, and I really think he's been performing like not maybe as well in Pro League, but especially in that Rotterdam qualifier against that level of opposition. He was been performing really well, and he had one really good map against Liquid as well, of course, which we will get onto at some point. But yeah, like I think Major, his return has brought an air of calm and real, like obviously having a proper IGL, it isn't Xantaras or Woxic, a real good like mid-rounding aspect, which this team did not have before. And I reckon they can be a team that can genuinely make the major through the RMR over the likes of other teams that we'll be talking about, like Sprout and Falcons, for example. So I'm actually quite confident in them after what I've seen lately. And their 2-0 versus Liquid was very very convincing. And of course, they could have genuinely made playoffs if Liquid didn't beat Cloud9. If Cloud9 beat Liquid 2-1 in that final game, somehow or other, with head-to-heads, Eternal Fire would have made it to playoffs with a 2-3 record, unbelievably. So, I mean, they only have themselves to blame for losing against EG and losing comprehensively, it has to be said. But this team can do something, and I think Major is really giving them a big helping hand.
I don't know, like, my concern again comes back to the conversations we were having before, because yeah, it is great to see guys like Major come back, and it is great to see the returns that they've made in this roster, but ultimately it hits the same brick wall that we saw from even the Space Soldiers back in the day. They get up to that position where it's like, oh, here we go, they're like a great, potentially tier 1 team, they're right at the precipice of tier 2, and then they just go to these tier 1 events and not do as well as everyone would have hoped them to. And yeah, the optimism is great for those qualifier runs, for those tier 2 tournaments, but even you take a look at the performances of those guys, yes, they are rusty, but they weren't quite there with them. The transition to tier 2 to tier 1 has not treated Eternal Fire. Yeah, definitely so. Yeah. Like, anyone who looked at Xantaras and thought he wasn't going to be hard carrying in any iteration of Eternal Fire is probably a moron. But like just like it's this problem that you're always going to see with a team of this caliber or of this background. The fact that they're always going to make that move, do great in tier 2 like they have done so far, and then they'll try and make that transition to only fail it. I don't know what they're going to have to do to make it solidly, right? Like, I think they're competing in the RMR. I'm pretty sure they are. So like maybe there's a chance that they can do something in that tournament and then prove us wrong. Maybe this is the warm up to the main attraction, to the main show. But I'm just not as convinced. Until I see something a bit more solid from them, then I kind of have to stick by what we said during the post show. The pick and post show.
Fair enough. I still think xFloud should be added, by the way. He should be added back. xFloud was a super underrated player.
Big asset,
I think if you take Paz away, I mean, obviously, unfortunately, but like, I think Major and Paz came as sort of a duo from Valorant, of course, former Sangel players. And, there were instances, of course, in their recent matches for Eternal Fire where they haven't played particular maps for like 2 years. And I think Paz and Major, I remember checking that the last time they played on LAN was almost very close to the end of the Space Soldiers era. So that was a big change of scenario and for Paz and Major to actually be playing on LAN again. But yeah, I think as Retro said, like xFloud, from what I saw from him in the Calyx version of Eternal Fire, even without the Deaddy IGL of Major, I thought he was superb, and I think he deserves to return at some point if Paz is not, doing his job, for example, at the RMI. He won't be getting the big numbers, as I said, but if he's not, going at least even every game like he probably should, then I think you have to try and bring xFloud back for me.
All right, well, we'll see your Eternal Fire. We'll go in that one. Any other comments, Retro Scriv?
No, mate.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I like Eternal Fire. They're cool. They're fun. But yeah, I'm kind of agreeing with you where I think they have a bit of a place at the moment, and I feel like being a potential taker, it's funny because it's basically the same as what Space Soldiers were, being a maybe nick a map away type team is pretty much all I expect from them at this point. Maybe the odd BO3 goes their way out of nowhere.
Cool. Well, in that case, we'll move away from the group, start talking about the playoffs. We'll try see if we can shoot through this relatively quickly, because Retro, you do have another talk show in less than 45 minutes. So let's take a look one more time at the bracket just to refresh ourselves as to how things went down. Of course, the big thing that I want to start off by talking about is these two teams, Na'Vi and Faze, because everyone was like, here we go, opposite ends of the bracket. They're going to be in the finals. We're going to add another chapter to this era of Counter-Strike. Did that happen? Fuck no, it didn't. They bottled it to a greater or lesser extent, I guess you could say, in the quarterfinals, and that was very unexpected, boys. What happened? What happened there?
I'm gonna jump in here and backtrack a little bit further, and I want to talk about the opening matchups that these guys had.
Sure.
The Faze complexity game. I mean, sure, Faze won it pretty well in the last 2 maps, but complexity banged them on overpass 16-9 against the best team in the world. Pretty respectable stuff. So your confidence is going to be knocked. And when you look at the Na'Vi heroic game, the one before that, the first 2 maps end 16-14 and they go 1 apiece. Like, that is quite literally a matchup where either game can go either way. And we could have seen Na'Vi go 0-2 in that opening matchup. And not to mention, complexity will one up over FaZe Clan. In my honest opinion, I think a lot of confidence maybe knocked at the beginning. But for the G2 game, I think G2 just had a great game and a great series overall against Na'Vi. I don't think there's any excuses to how well that those guys played. And for C9 as well, I think that they deserved it more than anything over FaZe in that matchup. I think for Cloud9, a lot of people at home maybe don't know that obviously C9 have had a little bit of trouble. I think back to maybe the online era is sort of where Gambit came up, and they had a pretty decent few runs here and there in events, but never have we seen them rock a massive event like this and do so well against an upset, right? I feel like they've had quite the easy run in playoffs, and maybe there has been a tough game here or there, but to come against FaZe in the quarterfinal matchup and beat them 2-1, FaZe win 16-13 map 1, and they win 16-8, 16-11 in maps 2 and 3. I've got to give respect to C9 and for G2 in that matter, because similar fate happened to both teams where it was FaZe that go 1-0 up, it was G2 to go 0-1 down, and both teams then lose 2-1 and the reverse sweep happens. So I think it's actually just a matter of the fact that maybe these teams are relaxed a little bit heading into the RMR and want to put all their eggs in the major basket. But at the same time, you can't take away from the fact that C9 and G2 just look like the better teams in both matchups.
So there's...
Yeah, I do want to get into, like, sorry, I do want to get into a bit more detail on G2 and Cloud9 in a second here, but I do feel like there was some amount of, like, FaZe and Na'Vi lacking over the course of their run. Like, you mentioned the complexity matchup for FaZe, that easily could have been around a 12 upset, and how fucking massive that would have been for complexity. Yes. But even Na'Vi had their little spurts and moments, particularly calling back to the group stage where there was that endpoint loss, and it was like, what the fuck? How have they managed that? So I don't think that it's entirely down to Cloud9 and G2 being fantastic. They were great, and we'll get to that in a minute, but there were some weaknesses for Na'Vi and FaZe for me, like coming into this playoff. So Scriv, go on.
Yeah, no, it's different. I can definitely touch on that. I think that it's difficult because, you know, they're top dogs, everyone's going to be after them. That's always sort of the classic. You've got a lot of these teams that you don't usually play. You can maybe watch the VODs or whatever, watch the demos, but that's still not going to give you the best feel. How do they perform while they're under pressure? What is it like to kind of read them in the mid-round and things like that? And yeah, there were definitely, you know, Na'Vi sticks out quite a lot that they only just made it through. But FaZe, you know, they drop a map here or there, maybe where they shouldn't have done in the group stage, and a few were a bit closer than maybe they would have liked. The big one for me, here's the big one, fellas. You got to remember back to the Na'Vi and the heroic game. There were these massive tech issues in the middle.
Yeah.
And it seemed for heroic, once we got back into the game, that they were really frustrated by that. And, you know, they were in the lead on Overpass, that third and final map that they played. I feel like heroic maybe, you know, it's all, we're never going to know. But I think that heroic perhaps could have won it if they were still in that same sort of winning mindset. I think, did they come off? Had they won the second map as well? Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
so
they won 16-14.
They just won their map. Then they go into Overpass. They got off to a good start. And then just everything, you know, the wind taken out of the sails quite massively, which I think really did affect them. So I have a feeling that they actually would have been in, I'd say like a 70% chance of winning, to be honest. They were looking pretty good, and it just seemed like it pooped them out. And then, you know, they got back into it and they were going to win that round, and then, we've disconnected, you know, and it's like, obviously it is something that's fully out of the control. It was like a targeted account attack or whatever, something like that.
Valve issue, Steam issue, so they should be fixing that ASAP.
Yeah,
for sure.
So it's really nothing that Heroic can't be like, God damn it, ESL, why are you using cheap internet, or some stupid admin kicked a Ethernet cable out, or there's no one that they can really look at, because it is, as Trav says, like a Valve specific issue. So it goes way over the heads of everyone involved. So yeah, I think that's kind of a really curious case, but I couldn't see Na'Vi beating G2. I will say that the FaZe game, I wouldn't call it an upset. I think at the moment we're looking at G2, Na'Vi, Vitality, Faze, Cloud9, these are the teams that are really able, I think, to play around with each other and battle for the top spots at tournaments, and it could be a really good time. Throw a bit of Liquid in there as well, who, you know, how sustainable is it going to be? We'll move on to them in a second, but I do feel like there's, you know, a good amount of competition to come through into this major, which is always fun. But yeah, Faze, not quite the top level. And I don't know. It's a weird one, man. We'll see how they look in the RMR. We'll see how they look in the major, because I feel like FaZe need the stakes to be as high as they're ever going to be, you know? And I don't know that after they've won their major, Katowice, Cologne, you know, they're after the Grand Slam, I guess, but they've got like 4 or 5 more tournaments to do that in. I don't know that their entire hearts and souls, their lives depend on it, will be in the pro. And again, even just sort of subconsciously, you know, where it's like, I don't think they're going to look at a Pro League quarterfinal and think that this is everything my career's been building up to is this moment.
I genuinely think they've been saving strats. This is the one situation in like Counter-Strike where the meme of saving strats could genuinely be real. I think FaZe and Navi, I think, are genuinely saving themselves for what they know is the centerpiece of the year for sure.
Okay. I mean, I never really like consider that, because I think it's just a bullshit excuse for when teams don't really usually normally they're a bit of a more of a bullshit excuse for them just to not performing that well. But I mean, like, look, end of the day, this was a massive underperformance, and I look towards that, and I have to question exactly why that was. Maybe they were saving strats. I, for one, am not quite the expert I'd like to be, so I can't come up with a definitive answer. But what I can do is look at the other side, and as Retro was mentioning earlier, Cloud9 and G2, they had some fantastic tournament performances overall. Again, both teams came up top of their groups, and they were able to easily make their way through those quarterfinals as appropriate, again beating Na'Vi and FaZe along their way. And for both of them, they're sort of shedding old skins, really, because like we're both looking at these two teams as this decent powerhouses in the past, but have not quite living up to their namesake as of late, especially for Cloud9, because obviously they've been dominant in the online era as the Gambit roster, as the players, and they'd come to land, they never really did all that well when it came to their performances. And I think that finally we're seeing them, you know, break that cycle, start to have some better performances in these LAN events. And I think that the future could finally seem to turn the corner on that old stigma of just being an online team for Cloud9.
I think Cloud9 were the worst possible opponents in the round for FaZe, to be honest. I genuinely think that I was actually almost on the edge of calling them my favorites to take that series, because I just think that the Cloud9 style, I mean, it's not as, you know, as horrible as Outsiders is, for example, but I think Cloud9 style is at a little sort of a level where it can stall teams like FaZe. And we had that, you know, infamous round where Rops is just sitting in apartments, not helping when they're executing B, which everyone was talking about on the desks. So yeah, I think FaZe need to look at some of that stuff, that especially the things that Rops are doing, maybe just being a little bit too much of the, you know, the baity star rifler, if you get what I mean. And I think Cloud9, yeah, they definitely deserve that victory, and they are looking like they're now more consistent on LAN than they ever were before, you know, considering that was always the big criticism of this team when they were Gambit and in the previous majors and the like. They've won Dallas and are looking better, and I think that they are you know, a genuine contender for just winning the whole major. I think if they can just iron out a few little details and keep the good form of players like Axel and Hobbit. Hobbit's another one I probably should mention. You know, those longevity sort of stats. You know, he's been around for so long and is still performing really well. I think, I think this team's looking pretty good. So we'll have to see how it goes.
All right, cool. G2 in a bit more depth on their own side of things. Obviously, come into this tournament with a couple of roster changes, particularly in regards to Hooksy and JKS. And it's Hooksy's world, and we're all just living in it, apparently, as they would like you to, as we would have us believe. Look, in terms of performances, obviously he is the IGL in this roster, so he won't be the man of the moment. But like generally, like you expect the guys on G2 to have their great moments. Nico mostly, obviously, dominating that board as you would expect. I wasn't quite as expectant as JKS to do as well as he did. I honestly thought he'd be closer to the 4th place position, which, to be fair, is not that far off. But like, credit to him, man. I wasn't as confident in this move for those two players, and for G2, it seems like it kind of made them this Pro League.
I would like to say one thing as well, as you pointed out. Hooksy's been in this roster for minutes compared to some of the other teams that we have in this event. And so the fact that he is quite literally 0.01 off of making all in the positive on the ratings side of things is massive. Sure, the KD doesn't look too good, but when you have Nico and Munacy, and to be fair, the argument for Hunter as well as a great fragger, you don't need Hooksy to be doing well when it comes to stats. I think he brings a lot to the table when it comes to his mind for the game, right? And sort of when it comes to.
So what did you say about JT?
Well, because
I'm sorry, I'm trolling you.
No,
I'm trolling you,
it's
Retro.
fine,
I'm trolling
I
you.
know. It's because they don't have the pieces that G2 have, right? And I think it's very obvious in the stats when you have two players going at a minimum 1.25 in your team. Hooksy's 0.99 is kind of made up for, right? And the excuse is very much already there. I do agree with you, Trav, that I think, you know, there maybe I was a little too harsh on Mr. JT. Hooksy's performance obviously being undervalued when it comes to this team, maybe, but at the same time, it's like his first or second event in G2 as the man that's calling the shots. It's his first two events, I feel like, basically living in tier 1, having that safe space. So he's always going to have a bit of extra nerve than maybe, you know, your Hunters, your JKS, your Munacys, and your Nikos.
Yeah, Hunter's been a bit poor, though.
Agreed.
I think a little bit poor.
I think that's another discussion that we can have, is that Hunter's kind of underperforming as a player. But I do want to look at this team and say I'm very excited to see them at the RMRs and indeed the Major. I don't think there's no way this team doesn't make it through. And overall, with how they played this event and the upsets they were getting and sort of the way they were conducting themselves, I feel like they put in a very strong performance. Sure, it's disappointing to lose in the semifinals coming off of the success of beating Na'Vi, but you lose to the team that wins the whole lot, right? So I don't think you can sit here and say like that is disappointing, because at the end of the day, they lost to the best team in this event. So for me, I think there's a lot of chips on that G2 table for me, especially after that second map as well. Heartbreak on Inferno, 19-16, quite literally could have gone either way at any point, even in regulation, it felt like. I've got to give it to them, man. Yeah, I got to give it to them, man. I think that the G2 guys, they'll be looking at that and going, we really should have seen a third map against Vitality, and we really should have seen ourselves through to Liquid. I'm very, very happy to see that performance. And as you can see, the stats are kind of short, a little bit imbalanced, but they have put in a mega shift when it comes to the turnaround of bringing in some new talent.
I think. Sorry, go on, Scriff.
I was just going to say very quickly, I don't think that I think they'll continue to struggle in the big games.
Yeah.
A semi against. Oh yeah, it might be the team that went on to win it, but surely we want G2 to go on and be the team that's going to... And I think that they will top fours, get to a final if the bracket's cool for them. But I still think that they're going to struggle to win games unless they get that super miracle game where, you know, Hooksy gets at least 10 kills. No, but, you know, it's like
That's all right.
You know what I mean? Like,
beautiful.
That's the meme end. But also on a real, it's like, Hunter's got to perform, Munacy's got to perform, Nico's got to perform, and then JKS and Hooksy have to kind of pull their weight and not drag you back, you know? And I think that to ask for all of that against who likely will be a top 3, top 4 team in the world, you know, Vitality or Liquid or whatever, as it could have been in this tournament, I don't think that they'll be able to get all those pieces fall into place at that time. You know, they'll probably spend it on a quarterfinal against Faze or whatever, that it's like, right, this is a good looking Faze, we don't expect G2 to win, and then it's like, wow, how have G2 done that? And then in the next one, it's like they can't get all those same things to fall into place, so they will lose out to Vitality or Liquid or Na'Vi or whatever, you know?
Yeah, that was my big concern, right? Because like, obviously Hooksy's made an improvement to G2 on the whole, but in those big matches against a team like Vitality, you're going to see shit like this. You know, like these rounds when G2 are on match point to leave to Heartbreak and the confidence goes and the coordination goes, and then shit like this as well, where you score 1 round and a half and what was a respectable 8-7 for the Vitality.
It was that
lead.
Inferno game. It was that Inferno game, wasn't it, where Hooksy was calling like very similar strats to take mid, late every single time, you know, and they finally like pulled rotations over from B to go A, and then they still went back B even when, you know, I think A was like vaguely open. It was one of the two, vice versa call. I forget which site exactly it was, but like it was very similar calls over and over from Hooksy, and you could sort of tell he was running out of ideas in those scenarios.
Yeah, I think the big concern is that G2 obviously has spent all this money and they've brought in these big stars over the last like year or so, and they want to be a championship winning side, but they're just not quite there yet. And that is the big concern, I think, for bringing someone like Hooksy in as an IGL, is that I don't think he's going to be the kind of IGL to make them a championship winning side. Definitely a contender and a top 4, obviously in Pro League, is nothing to scoff at, but for G2, I'm not certain whether that will be enough for them as the team, as the organization. And again, we could get into this conversation so much for now, but unfortunately Retro is pushed for time, so I do want to try and get through the grand finals very quickly to close out the show. Liquid, Vitality, both teams had a stellar run over the Pro League itself. Obviously both teams managed to make their way in as Vitality, the top team in Group A. Liquid just barely managed to make their way in at 3rd place position, so for them it was a bit more of a difficult run, but hell of a grand final and a hell of a playoff situation for them all. Liquid especially having to go from the round of 12 rather than the quarterfinals and beat out Fnatic, Mouse and Cloud9 to eventually lose to Vitality. So for me, I want to start on the Vitality side of things, because for them, obviously, their big thing was trying to make the international project work. It hasn't worked up to this point where finally they get this this trophy on the board, and it feels to me like vindication that they finally made the right moves to at least start to contest in a certain capacity. Boys, what do you think?
I was gonna say, sorry, Scriv. I've got to give props to them. As you said, right? I think they've been working on this project for a long while, and a lot of people would be very quick to just make another change, right? I think we've seen it many a times before, where sometimes teams don't stick projects out long enough, and then it's like, dude, I want to make this change. I don't like this. We're not getting the results that we wanted. And Vitality very quickly could have just gone back to their roots, right? But they stick with what they have, and finally it pays off. And something I'd like to point out in this matchup very specifically is off the back of going 1-1-1, right? Both teams win 16-7 on their map picks respectively. It was Inferno and Dust too. Vitality lose an overtime, a triple OT on Mirage, 25-21. And this is where sort of that Vitality experience comes back in, is that off the back of that, they then go into another time on Overpass and they push it their way, and then they're able to close out Vertigo. And I think only Vitality in this matchup would, with the experience that they have and the players and the bodies and the minds that they have in this team, would be the only team I would put down to be able to go down in triple overtime on Mirage and then come back to win Overpass in overtime and then Vertigo afterwards. I think that was a massive recovery, and that best of 5 was such an enjoyable watch because of that reason. Not to mention ZywOo setting a world record in that best of 5 is is unbelievable, man. The highest
unreal.
The highest kill count. The highest kill count in a best of 5 ever, 143 kills in a best of 5.
This was 2019 ZywOo. He was back.
Yeah, I was going to mention this.
His positioning was unbelievable.
He looked a different breed in that game. And to be fair, in this tournament in its entirety, man, like he definitely is showing exactly what he's made of. I don't think this is now the argument being, oh, is he going to be the #1 player in the world? I think that boat is pushed out way too far, and anyone that's thinking that, I think, is a little bit out of their mind. 100% though, this is redemption. And if we see the same ZywOo we did in this event that we do in the RMRs and the Major, honestly, I am so excited for this Vitality team. And I think if we get this same team, they are a top 4 contender at a minimum.
Yeah, I feel like a really interesting case with Vitality to sort of bear in mind is where, you know, obviously there's the clear history of where these players are at, but also just kind of the fact that I think the shift in the community and everything is like everyone wants really quick results. You know, you spend a bit of money, you add a player, and it's like, yo, it's got to work out now. And sometimes it does, right? The change at G2 feels like it's worked pretty quickly. They had Alexi B in there, it just wasn't the right match. And they figured that out. And now that you're back to being a bit more free or whatever, it looks like, it feels like they're performing better. We've obviously given our thoughts on how far we'll see that go. But, you know, you have to bear in mind with the Vitality, it's like, so you've got Zonic, you've got Dupree in there. And I did have to double check. Zonic joined question mark, which was the interim name for TSM moving into Astralis in 2016. So it took, and, you know, sort of towards the middle of 2016. So it took a good year and a half, 2 years before they started finding, you know, massive success. Obviously, they managed to win a major together before that and whatnot. Magisk joins in 2018. That's when sort of the dynasty, I guess you could say, started. But Dupree especially has got to be a player that sits there and goes, this takes time. We felt like we had one of the best teams in and around, 2015, heading into 2016, but we couldn't win shit. Every single time that we got to a top 4, those big semi-final games, Fnatic, Luminosity, whatever, they'd get shut down. Na'Vi even, right? So these guys kind of know what an Apex obviously is another well-tenured kind of player. I think they know that this kind of thing can take time. It would have been nice to have a few more results, but they had to work on, very different philosophies, I think, coming into this team. They've probably had to work on getting the right voices in play. Don't know whether Apex has been fully into it and, everyone has to listen to me. I think we've seen in some of the clips and over the course of COVID when he did a bit of IGL and Magisk likes to get involved. Maybe they've had to try and work that out and there's a little bit of conflict where Magisk is called another thing or whatever, and etc., right? I feel like they've had a lot of culture shock, in terms of teams, in terms of, where all these players are from. And again, it feels like maybe Spinks has come in and is that, final little linchpin where they don't have to worry as much about the firepower aspect, no flame to Masuta or whatever, but I think that that's something that you can just take a step back after a tournament and be like, we needed a bit more out of him. There was a game in there, 16-13 loss. It might be a simple way of looking at it, but if my guy got 5 or 6 more kills, then we probably win that game, and once you remove that aspect, you can start working on the structure to a much better level, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think really what propelled, it's a really obvious thing to say, and we've already gone over it, but I just think that what really propelled Vitality through so many situations is just so many rounds that looked unwinnable. Zyra would make something happen. There was some particular rounds on Mirage where he was just in the perfect spot. Like, his positioning, he obviously, positioning is such a huge part of Counter-Strike, everyone knows that, but just it was literally S tier where everyone else's positioning was A tier, he was just that cut above in so many different situations. The clutch with the M4 when he got one through the smoke, and then the kill on ramp, I think that was a 1v3.
Yeah.
The AWP one as well. And just so many that I can think of, and Overpass as well. I mean, just absolutely ridiculous. I think the only way Liquid were going to win that series was if they managed to win Overpass. They had a very small window to take Overpass. They couldn't, and I think everyone realized in the end that they'll be 1, just completely shit exhausted, and 2, it's Vertigo, which is not the map that they are, most well known for. But they put up a good fight on Vertigo, to be fair, considering all those factors. But yeah, I think Vitality, once they won Overpass, it was only one result.
Well, for Liquid, they didn't quite have the most record-breaking run throughout the course of Pro League. Again, had to struggle through the groups, had to go through the round of 12, and overall the numbers, I mean, look, we can talk about numbers all day in that sort of sense, but look, they made it to the grand finals, and for North America especially, this is going to be a huge result, a huge tournament run for them. The idea that they've finally managed to make this region do something of worth seems like it's finally America is good again, at least for the time being. Now, whether that carries forward into the next big international tournament is something to be seen. But in terms of Liquid themselves, they came in and they've had to make roster revamps themselves. They've had to do different bits and pieces to try and get the roster together. Shocks was the worst move that they could have made, and that was a bit of a parting of the ways. They brought in Yakindar, and it seems to me like he was another European addition that ultimately was going to make this whole make this roster have the potential that they need to make success happen, and in this case it was a second place as appropriate. So for Liquid, look, it wasn't a win, but I think a lot of people didn't expect them to didn't expect them to make the grand finals in the first place. Again, everyone had those 2 CIS European teams and those particular guys as the contenders overall. So for Liquid, positives to take away as well.
Yeah, I think Liquid are huge positives. Scriv was you are a proponent of promoting Liquid to a possible challenges for these events, and actually I think you've been very well justified. And it's not all. I feel like it's also not all down to Yakindar. I will say that Nitro's, I think maybe 50% of it is, to be fair, but Nitro's numbers have been a lot better. And I think he's sort of settling back in again now to Liquid more than he was before. Naf stepped up again. He was, better than he had been in previous events. Of course, there's still a question mark over Elige. I think Elige had a very poor grand finals by his standards. I think his event overall was okay, but I think he's still getting used to some of the roles on the team. I mean, around on Inferno, for example, on like A site with Naf playing Pit, I think Elige looks a bit lost sometimes on the A site. It's a bit of a weird one. So I think he's had to adjust to being moved into different positions now. Yekindar is being Yekindar. But yeah, I think ever since they got 2-0'd by Eternal Fire, as Naf said in that interview, I think with the Dust US, I think I just lit a fire in them. They were insane since then. And I think I'm honestly only been impressed. And if they can keep it up, they're going to be, around about the top 4, top 5 for a long time to come. I think with Yekindar.
Yeah, I think I can definitely agree. It feels like there's a few factors here, like how long can they keep it up? They do, as Trav said. I think that sure, the rest of the fields looks a little bit better, but Yekindar is a really big part of it, right? And how long can he keep that up? He has quite a particular style that I think maybe once teams start, and now they definitely will, because it's like in Outsiders, it was a bit of a Rops and Maus situation where it's like maybe the rest of the team around him is just not quite fit for him, not quite good enough, blah, 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 whatever, the way they play, etc., etc. Now, immediately, they've had their bit of time, they have had the break and everything, and he gets signed officially, and they're now going to turn some heads. So I think a lot of attention will be paid to this particular player in general, and maybe you have to, change up your style and just tweak a few things in your head when you're up against Yekindar and what he's going to go for, whatever. But what I will say is that things like OC, for example, they're still a little bit unsure of what to do with him. Some spots, some T rounds and whatnot, he's on a rifle where maybe you'd want him on an AWP. It seems like the way that he, likes to approach the game is a little more regimented, phase kind of based, as in PH, like scaling, I guess we'd probably call it. I know it's a confusing word, isn't it, in what we're talking about? But he'll move through, and it's like clear this out, clear that, and whatnot. Maybe needs a guy to help it. Whereas I think Liquid want him to be explosive and get in there and just open up a round out of nowhere, bit of a clutch in the mid round or whatever to make this doable again. And that's something that he's not quite had, in the past, and probably to be the ideal all-round AWPer, they'll actually want him to do a little bit of both. And him being one sort of a specialist type AWPer or whatever in one particular style that's maybe a bit safer, a bit more passive, that's going to work domestically because he's just that much better and his team was that much better. But on the international stage, there's still a bit more that they need to get out of this guy. It's getting better, though. There is progress being made, but it'll cost. When you're playing against fucking Zywoo like this, my guy, you really do need to be pulling your weight. You can't be relying on a guy on the rifle. Even if, for me, I think this continues and he has a nice finish to the end of the year, Yekindar could be like a top 3, top 2 rifler easily, and probably battling for the likes of Nico, depending on where they place as being that highest ranked rifler of the year on the all HLTV rankings. But you need the AWP to, at the very least, be hitting like 80-85% of the level that the guys like Zywoo, Simple, and I guess Munacy now are starting to creep into that conversation. And for me, it's more like 60 at the minute for OC, and it's just not quite enough. And yeah, you've got like a triple overtime or whatever. Again, easy to point the finger, but he could have been the difference if there's just a few rounds in there where that opening AWP battle against Zywoo, he slaps him instead of it being the other way around, and that turns the round massively in favor of Liquid.
Awesome. Well, boys, I think we've hit all the primary beats and notes, and we've covered all the teams that we need to. So, and also we're conscious for time because Retro's on in 20 minutes. So we've got we're gonna have to peace out at this stage if for no other reason than that. But listen, boys, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a wonderful pleasure as always. You're the best team that a podcast creator could ever ask for. It seems like very, very interesting discussions, heated topics, and very irate individuals on the point. So again, thank you for joining me. We'll give everyone a chance to plug their shit, but first thing to plug is that we're all going to be doing the RMR for the course of this week. It was announced during the show from ESL that we're all on BNC streams, so I'm excited, guys. I'm sure that you all are too, so that's the first thing to know for everybody, and we'll go clockwise this time, starting with Retro to plug your shit and say what you need to say.
Yeah, thanks mum and dad for believing in me, for making the RMRs. Couldn't have done it without them. Make sure to follow my dad. No, I don't know. Yeah. No, thanks for having me. I don't have anything to plug. It's a pleasure being
Not
here.
even Ted's stream? You're not even going to plug that talk show?
No.
That's his job. Yeah, that's his job,
I was
mate.
going to say, if
Retro's already-
he wants
listen,
the
mate,
numbers, he
Retro's
should
already
do
done
the
enough.
promo. Yeah.
The fact that
I'm
he's
not
straight in
motivating
there,
announcing
straight
that I'm
in there
there.
after
Yeah,
this.
exactly. I don't get paid
know.
on the hour, so
He
you know
he
what?
saved a few points for the TED stream as well, you know. What I mean?
I
He saved
don't
a
know,
couple.
man. Maybe I'll be listening to this while going over there. And I'll be like, yeah, you're right, yeah.
Just stealing our points. Yeah, that's genius, mate. Genius.
Hot takes time was good.
Trav, mate, what you got to plug?
Yeah, watch the C stream for my RMR games. Wait, let me check what they are again. They are the 0-2 elimination match, 2-1 for qualification, 1-2 for elimination, 2-2 decider. I'm bloody well excited. Follow me on Twitter at TravCS. Thanks, Mum and Dad, as well, for believing in me and not shouting at me when I'm very shouting loudly at a game
Indeed.
at like 1 a.m. in the
I wish
morning.
I had the same.
God bless them. Best people ever. Scriv, have at it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, same sort of sentiment. I think me and Trav are going to be on together for a few of those games as well, to be fair. So, you know, yeah, check it
Can't
out.
wait.
The RMR. It's going to be good, mate. The triple monitor setup, get all the streams on. I don't quite know what they're doing on the, you know, whether there's going to be a B stream desk and everything, but it could be crazy. There's going to be a lot of Counter-Strike going on, which is what we're all here for. But yeah, Scriv casts on everything. Run my own podcast, which is thankfully, you know, going well.
Starring approved.
Yeah. There you go. It is indeed. It is indeed. We got him on, and of course, it's the most viewed episode because that's how it goes with Thorin. But yeah, nonetheless, Scrivcast on everything. Just check it out, and thanks very much once again for setting it up, Jay. It's good fun.
We're going to have to leverage you as a return favour to sort me out with Thorin on this show.
Well, there you go. Yeah, maybe.
Right, well, until that point, we're going to have to bid you all to do that. Is Pro League wrapped up? The RMR starts tomorrow, and I'm sure I'm going to try and organise something that we can have a post-show for that event as well. Whether these boys join me is up to their discretion, although I would like to have you boys back. We'll officiate that later. And well, if you missed any part of the show, if you want to catch up with anything, or you want to just take a look at what we had to say on certain topics, then we'll be uploading this one to YouTube as well. So that's YouTube / The Eternal J. Might even think about putting this on Spotify as well. We'll think about that one. Anyways, boys, thanks for joining me once again. We'll see you back here after the RMR for the post show for that. For the time being, however, Pro League has been wrapped up, and I'm sure that there's plenty more Counter-Strike, of course, to enjoy over the course of the week. We'll see you guys next time, and yeah, take care.